Wang Chong smiled. As the saying goes, good things come in pairs. He had already received news from Wei Hao that the Wuzi steel weapons should be completed in a few days. As long as the other side was fine, he would be able to collect the money. Hua! With a flick of his robe, Wang Chong walked out of the room. The night was dark, and a bright moon hung high in the sky. Under the moonlight, the corridors of the Wang residence were dotted with lanterns. As Wang Chong ascended the stairs, he was greeted by countless gazes of respect and awe. Compared to before, all of the guards, servants, and maids looked at him in a completely different light. This series of events had not only changed the fate of the Wang clan, it had also changed Wang Chong's standing in the residence. It's time to cultivate. Wang Chong walked to a familiar corner, opened the stance, and began practicing the dragon bone art. Hard work could make up for one's lack of talent. Literary work couldn't be stopped, and martial arts couldn't be abandoned either. In this period of time, he felt that his strength had increased once more. The matter by the border continued to ferment in the capital. Through the rumors of the Yao clan's old master Yao paying a visit to Duke Jiu in the Four Quarters Embassy's peaceful harmony garden, the news of the Yao and Wang clan shaking hands had spread like wildfire in the capital. The Yao and Wang clan had been at odds for many years, but this was the first time that the Wang clan had surpassed the Yao clan. Yao Guangyi's failure by the border was the turning point of this matter, and it was the topic of discussion in the streets and alleys. Yao Guangyi's foresight was flawless, but this time, he was tossed aside like a monkey. Many people said that the Wang clan's Duke Jiu had invited a mysterious expert who was on par with Yao Guangyi to guide him. Now, in private, everyone was guessing who this powerful, mysterious master was. Putting aside the hustle and bustle outside, Wang Chong, as the expert whom many nobles and prestigious clans talked about on the streets, lived a peaceful life, secluded from the world, happily carrying out his plan to strike it rich. And this plan was already nearing its end. Ha, Wang Chong, look! The Wuzi steel weapon you spoke of has finally been forged. In a cave in the western suburbs of the capital, Wei Hao was holding a black sword that was about 3 feet long. He was laughing excitedly. This was the standard sword of the Central Plains. It had 2 blades, a straight blade, and the width of the blade was around 2 fingers wide. The black blade gave off a thick and sturdy feeling. Right, Wang Chong, why did you add a line on both sides of the blade? The swords of our Central Plains don't have such lines, right? Wei Hao suddenly scratched his head as he looked at the lines on both sides of the blade with a perplexed expression. This is called a blood groove, and it is specially designed for killing. When it stabs into a person's body, blood would spurt out from the blood groove. In a short period of time, the other party would lose a huge amount of blood. Wang Chong smiled. Ah! Wei Hao was shocked, and he nearly dropped the sword in his hand. Blood groove. Killing. Wang Chong, this sword sure is ferocious. Wang Chong smiled without saying a word. Wuzi steel weapons, including the Damascus scimitar, were originally meant for killing. In fact, all swords and sabers were meant for killing. They were designed for this purpose. Righteousness doesn't wield wealth, and compassion doesn't command troops. If one was timid, it was best to stay away from such a ferocious weapon. Give it to me. Wang Chong took the Wuzi steel sword from Wei Hao and weighed it in his hand. Compared to ordinary swords and sabers, the Wuzi steel sword was much heavier, weighing around 20 to 30 jin. If one didn't possess extraordinary strength, it would be difficult to wield a weapon weighing 20 to 30 jin for a long period of time. The first Wuzi steel weapon has finally been forged. Wang Chong thought to himself. With a casual wave of his hand, a sword slash flashed in the air, and a rock on the cliff in his right hand cracked open, causing rubble to fall down. Wow, how sharp! This sword of yours isn't ordinary. Wei Hao's head shrank back in shock. He had never tried the newly forged Wuzi steel sword before, so he didn't expect it to be so sharp. He knew the hardness of the rocks here. Back then, The Wei clan chose this place because the rocks here were dense and sturdy, making it suitable to be used as a forge. Even though the space here wasn't big, it took them almost half a year to excavate it. The masters in the residence had tried using extremely sharp swords and sabers, but they were only able to cut off a tiny bit of rubble. Yet, Wang Chang's sword was able to easily cut through the protruding rocks with just a single slash. The sword is still incomplete now. After I add inscriptions and quench it, it won't be as sharp as this. Wang Chong said calmly. Wei Hao was also speechless. He didn't understand a single one of the names that Wang Chong spoke of. Not to mention him, even his master didn't know anything about cold forging or anything like that. He really had no idea where Wang Chong learned so many things from. To tell the truth, Wang Chong, the Sindhi are asking for a huge sum. Just based on these swords, can you sell them for such a high price? You spent so much effort on it, I'm worried that it'll all go to waste. Wei Hao said worriedly. Other than him, no one else knew that Wang Chong owed a huge debt of 90,000 gold taels. He had been thinking about this matter and had been secretly worried about it. Don't worry. You'll understand when the time comes. Wang Chong indifferently said, unconcerned. Holding the Wuzi steel sword in his hands, Wang Chong's heart was in turmoil. He suddenly thought of his cousin, Wang Zhuyan. The matter of the Wuzi steel weapons was already related to Wei Hao and the blacksmiths of the Duke of Wei residence. Now, it was his cousin, Wang Zhuyan's turn. Brat, what are you doing by fiddling with these things? In the west of the capital, in the Shishir pavilion, a red carpet was laid on the floor and the bed was made of gold and jade. Wang Chong's cousin, Wang Zhuyan, was currently stretching her body contentedly. With one hand, she toyed with the Wuzi steel weapons made by Wang Chong. Her 5 fingers moved swiftly while her other hand picked up a purplish-red grape. With an elegant posture, she placed it into her mouth and slowly chewed on it. Even Wang Chong had to admit that this cousin of his did have the capability to be proud. In terms of martial prowess, she was able to challenge most of the young geniuses and geniuses of the prestigious clans in the capital. In terms of demeanor, she was refined and elegant. Even the princesses of the royal palace were impressed by her. There was no place in the capital that she couldn't do well. Second sister, you promised me a while ago. You can't have forgotten about it, right? Wang Chong lowered his waist and chuckled. Even though he had gained some face before Big Uncle, Big Aunt, and Uncle, Wang Chong didn't dare to rub his nose against this cousin of his. This was the Buddha, and he was the monkey in his palm. Before he grew up, it was best for him to tuck his tail between his legs and behave himself. Based on your previous performance, I can help you with this matter. However, other than this, is there anything else you have forgotten to tell me? As Wang Zhuyan spoke, she turned around and stared deeply into Wang Chong's eyes. Anything else? Wang Chong was perplexed, unable to react in time. What is it? You still want to act before me? Wang Zhuyan harumphed coldly in displeasure. Do you need me to remind you? What's going on with the 8 gods pavilion? Shwa. As though a bolt of lightning had struck his head, in that instant, cold sweat trickled down Wang Chong's back. The heck? How did she know everything? Could it be that she stared at him 24 hours a day? He thought that he had managed to deceive her regarding the matter in the 8 gods pavilion. To think that she knew about it from the start, just that she feigned ignorance. Chapter 45. Look at that guilty look of yours. Wang Zhuyan harumphed. Her expression didn't change, but the edges of her lips curled up slightly, revealing a hint of glee. If not for the fact that I'm on good terms with Duke of Zhao's Princess Qianqian, you wouldn't think that you could hide this matter from me, right? Second sister, how would I dare to? Wang Chong hurriedly admitted defeat. Even if you give me 10 guts, I wouldn't lie to you. Only the heavens knew why his cousin was so resourceful. There was nothing that could hide from her. Yet, she was older than him, and he had to address her as second sister. Furthermore, he wasn't a match for her. A wise man doesn't fight when the odds are against him, so he quickly admitted his mistake. It's good that you know. Seeing the frightened expression on Wang Chang's face, Wang Zhuyan couldn't help but chuckle. This lad, she had to teach him a lesson from time to time lest he gets carried away. Initially, I wanted to tell your mother about this matter. However, on account of your previous performance, I'll let this matter go. However, you don't lack food or clothes at home, so why did you borrow so much money? 200 gold taels isn't a small sum, even I don't have that much money. 200 gold taels. Wang Chong was taken aback. He lifted his head abruptly and was taken aback. Isn't it 1700 gold taels? Does cousin not know about it? Wang Chong immediately felt energized. Even though he didn't know what was going on, it was clear that his cousin didn't know much about this matter. Duke of Zhao. That means Shaolin. There doesn't seem to be a need for him to help me keep it a secret, right? Why did he say that it was 200 gold taels? Could it be Su Bai? Wang Chong finally understood the situation. It had been a long time since he borrowed money from the Eight Gods Pavilion, but there wasn't much news about it. It was highly likely that she had accidentally uncovered the matter regarding his cousin. Wang Chong had a feeling that Su Bai and the others were intentionally hiding the matter for him. However, it probably wasn't because they were thinking of him. Wang Chong guessed that they were trying to make use of this matter to deal with him in the future. After all, the longer this matter dragged on, the more interest he would owe them. This brat is really up to no good. Wang Chong thought to himself. If he was really a hedonistic son of a rich family, he might really fall into his trap. However, Su Bai's matter could be put aside for now. To Wang Chong, the most important matter at hand was to appease this resourceful cousin of his. Cousin, I'm just borrowing money to buy shares and earn a little profit from doing business with others. If you don't like it, I'll return the 200 taels of gold to them. With a smile on his face, Wang Chong walked up and massaged his cousin Wang Zhuyan's arm. Brat, hurry up and return it. Is it that easy to borrow money from the Zhao public house? Wang Zhuyan slapped away Wang Chong's palm and chided him jokingly. How could Wang Chong dare to refute? By the way, second sister, I should have prepared a small gift for you. Wang Chong hurriedly tried to curry favor. This second sister of his was simply too resourceful. It felt as though there was nothing that could be hidden from her, causing him to feel cold sweat running down his back. He had to make use of this opportunity to bribe her. Otherwise, who knew what kind of trouble she would cause in the future? Oh. Wang Zhuyan sat up from her bed and her eyes lit up. Stretching out her right hand, she asked. What is it? Give it to me. How could Wang Chong dare to keep her in suspense? He hurriedly took out a small black object which he had prepared beforehand from his sleeves. What is this? Wang Zhuyan glanced at the unassuming object in Wang Chang's hands and astonishment filled her face. This is called an eyelash curler. Don't underestimate it just because it's rough and unassuming. With just a light pinch, it would be able to curl the eyelashes of noble ladies and young ladies. Wang Chong chuckled. This cousin of his was different from others. She didn't like gold or silver and only liked those weird items used by girls. For example, the nail file previously and the eyelash curler this time. Using such items to curry favor with her was the best way to do so. This was something that Wang Chong had comprehended during his wanton and unrestrained years when he battled wits and courage with his cousin, Wang Zhuyan. As long as he took out a small object that didn't exist in this world, second sister would be overjoyed. With the treasure he presented, cousin Wang Zhuyan would be able to flaunt it in front of her close friends for a long period of time. As long as she was happy, she wouldn't find trouble with him. Thus, Wang Chong would be happy as well. In fact, he might even help to cover up the news. As expected, second sister took Wang Chang's eyelash curler and tried to pinch it on her eyelashes in front of the copper mirror. As expected, she was overjoyed. Little brat, at least you're considerate. Leave the item here, leave it to second sister. You can come and collect it a few days later. Wang Zhuyan smiled widely. She had indeed forgotten about that matter. She waved her hands furiously, chasing him away. Right, there's still half a month before grandfather's birthday. Don't blame second sister for not reminding you, this is a huge matter. We only get to meet grandfather once a year, so make sure to perform well and don't say anything wrong. In the end, Wang Zhuyan called out to Wang Chong and reminded him with a serious expression. I understand. Wang Chong made a funny face. Leaving behind the Wuzi steel sword, he turned around and left. Cousin Wang Zhuyan's progress was much faster than Wang Chong had expected. Roughly 3 days later, Wang Chong received 4 Wuzi steel swords with strength inscriptions. Heavy. Wang Chong held one of the swords in his hands and he could clearly feel the weight of the swords. Upon closer inspection, one could see that on the 3-foot-long sword, strands of strange vein patterns were wrapped around the sword like vines. Beneath the pitch-black body of the sword, there was a faint glow. Compared to 3 days ago, the Wuzi steel swords didn't seem to have changed much. However, Wang Chong could clearly feel that the Wuzi steel swords were different from before. Wang! Wang Chong stretched his right hand out and grabbed the hilt of the sword. In an instant, a powerful surge of energy gushed into his body. Kaka sounds echoed from within Wang Chong's body, and a feeling as though water had melted into his body. Wang Chong felt as though the sword had become a part of his body. What incredible strength! In just a few short breaths, Wang Chong could clearly feel his aura rising by a notch. From Origin Energy Tier 4, he reached Origin Energy Tier 5. Furthermore, all of this happened in an instant. These weaponsmiths sure are fearsome. This kind of strength left Wang Chong in awe. At the same time, he felt deep respect for them. It was rumored that those who could become weaponsmiths were all formidable experts. Even though Yao Feng was one of the 8 talents of the capital, he was still a far cry from matching up to these weaponsmiths. This was only possible because her cousin was very resourceful and knew many nobles, young ladies of aristocratic families, and princesses in the palace. That was why she was able to accomplish this task. Wang Chong, as per your request, I have cleared out the cavern. You can use everything here without any worries. Also, there are guards standing guard at the entrance. I have already passed down an order that no one is to approach while you are forging the swords. A voice sounded from behind. Wei Hao walked over casually and gestured for Wang Chong to be at ease. Thank you. Wang Chong nodded his head and recovered from his daze. Now that the inscriptions on the swords were done, all that was left was the final step, quenching. Help me keep an eye on it. By sunrise tomorrow, everything will be done. Wang Chong gestured to Wei Hao and his little sister. Then, he parted the black curtain at the entrance and walked in alone. The massive cavern was empty. There wasn't a single person in sight. Wei Hao had already cleared out the cavern for Wang Chong so that Wang Chong could focus on his work. The final step for any weapon was quenching. However, Wang Chong didn't want anyone to be present when it came to quenching the Wuzi steel. The quenching of this steel was different from any other steel. This would be an important bargaining chip for Wang Chong to use against the Abbasid Caliphate for the Hyderabad ores in the future. All the flames in the cavern were extinguished. This was at Wang Chong's request. However, there was a pile of pine branches on the ground, each of them around 3 chi tall. Wang Chong wasn't in a hurry to quench the swords. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the cold ground and waited patiently. There were still a few hours before sunrise. As long as there was a moment before sunrise, when light and darkness alternated, that was the best time to temper the wood steel. Different from the process of smelting and cold forging, the quenching process was the shortest and most important. Little sister, what do you think your brother is doing in there? It's just quenching, is there a need to make it so complicated? Even we aren't allowed in. I asked the swordsmiths today, and they said that this step is simple. All he has to do is to plunge it into the cold water after it's heated up. Why is your brother making it so complicated? A rustling voice came from outside. Wang Chong could tell that it was Wei Hao's voice. Hearing this voice, Wang Chong couldn't help but chuckle. Wei Hao's doubts represented the thoughts of most swordsmiths in this era. In this era, people's understanding of quenching was still at the stage of, if the temperature of the weapon was lowered in a short period of time, the quality of the sword would be raised to a certain extent. In fact, most swordsmiths would plunge the sword into the cold water after they were done forging. Those who didn't take it seriously would skip it, thinking that as long as the sword wasn't too hot, it would cool down on its own. There were very few people who treated quenching as an important step as Wang Chong. It will take at least 6 to 7 years for people in this era to understand the true use of quenching. A thought flashed across Wang Chong's mind as he shook his head. Wang Chong possessed knowledge that was far ahead of this era when it came to the forging of swords and sabers. Many people knew that swords and sabers needed to be quenched. However, very few people knew that quenching was the most important step in the forging of swords and sabers. It was far more important than any other step. Quenching could greatly increase the steel's rigidity, hardness, wear resistance, fatigue strength, toughness, and corrosion resistance. This was the fastest and biggest step in the forging of weapons. Different weapons had different methods of quenching. The top-notch weapons in the world all had their own unique methods of quenching. It was a pity that due to their misunderstanding, most swordsmiths' understanding of quenching remained at the lowest level of water quenching. Unbeknownst to them, by plunging a sword into cold water, it would cause great damage to the steel and charcoal contained in the sword. Even though the surface of the sword was perfect and the quality had been raised, the internal structure of the sword was already filled with countless cracks. Such swords couldn't be used for long. Some of the swords even broke on the spot. That was the reason why there were so many cracked, broken, and defective weapons during the quenching process. But it was a pity that most swordsmiths didn't pay any heed to it. They thought that there was a problem with the steel or their forging method. This wasn't just the case in the East. Even in the West, where the weapon trade was booming, the Arab swordsmiths were the same. Chapter 46. Wuxi steel was different from other kinds of steel. It could not be quenched with water. That way, this precious steel would be completely destroyed. The Hyderabad project was of great importance. Wang Chong would not let anyone else handle it. Time passed slowly, and the discussions outside the cave gradually quieted down. Wang Chong sat alone in the cave. He was extremely calm. It was unthinkable for him to not return at night in the past. However, ever since the incident at the border, the entire Wang clan looked at Wang Chong in a different light. Even Wang Chong's mother was not as strict with him as before. It's about time. Suddenly, Wang Chong felt something. He opened his eyes and a dazzling light shot out. He could feel that it was almost sunrise. Standing up, Wang Chong quickly walked over and gathered the pine branches that Wei Hao had gathered into a circle. Chi! With the sound of flint, the cave was quickly lit up with a raging fire. When the pine branches were burnt to a bright red charcoal and piled up on the ground, Wang Chong took out the black semi-finished Wuxi steel sword. He took a pair of pliers from the stove and used them to clamp the sword hilt. Then, he buried it in the bright red charcoal. After about the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, the Wuxi steel sword that was buried in the charcoal gradually turned red and started to emit flames. Wang Chong stared at the emitted flames. His expression was tense and his eyes were extremely focused. During the quenching process of Wuxi steel, the flames emitted by the sword were an important part of it. The reason why Wang Chong chose to do it at sunrise was that the color of the flames emitted by the Wuxi steel sword was the basis for judging the quality of the quenching. Different colors actually represented different temperatures of the weapon. If it was too bright or too dark, it would affect the color of the flames emitted by the Wuzi steel sword, which would affect the effect of the quenching. The effect of quenching at different temperatures would be completely different. Just a difference of 1 degree Celsius could forge a weapon with completely different properties. However, the temperature of the flame could not be measured, so the color of the flame became an important basis for judgment. Almost there. In the charcoal, the Wuzi steel sword began to emit a bright red color like a strawberry. Wang Chang's eyes lit up. Without any hesitation, he picked up the Wuzi steel sword, turned around quickly and dipped it into the iron trough filled with yellowish-brown oil. This was something that Wang Chong had already prepared. When the red Wuzi steel was immersed in the ice-cold oil, from extreme heat to extreme cold, the huge change in temperature caused the surface of the sword to sizzle with thick black smoke. Whether we can get the real Wuzi steel depends on this step. Wang Chong was extremely nervous as he nailed the iron trough. The Hyderabad or plan, from negotiations to casting, to inscription, to quenching, had now reached the final step. Even though he spoke confidently, Wang Chong was actually feeling uneasy and uncertain. The oil in the iron trough wasn't ordinary water used for quenching. Instead, it was a mixture of sesame oil, sheep fat, butter, asphalt brought over by the merchants of the western regions, and other liquids. This was the crux of a Wuzi steel weapon. In his previous life, the Central Plains did obtain some wood steel, but the reason why the weapons forged from them were so inferior to those forged from Damascus and the Abbasid Caliphate was not just in terms of sharpness, but also in terms of appearance. It was because they had not grasped the quenching method. In fact, there were even some who suspected that the wood steel weapons of the Central Plains weren't forged from Hyderabad ores at all. Instead, they were just imitations under the guise of wood steel. In truth, it wasn't that Sindh didn't provide the Central Plains with the real Wuzi steel, but that the Central Plains didn't have a grasp of the Hyderabad quenching method. Unable to wash out the natural patterns on the surface of the Wuzi steel, the legend of the sawtooth on the edge of the blade was inconceivable. This kind of Wuzi steel was only slightly sharper than a top-notch saber or sword. It couldn't be considered as one of the 3 great weapons. In his previous life, the reason why the Abbasid Caliphate controlled the entire supply of Wuzi steel in Sindh was because of the Hyderabad quenching method. However, in this life, Wang Chong wouldn't allow them to succeed. Hiss! When the black smoke dissipated, the Wuzi steel sword in the iron trough had cooled down completely. Wang Chong used a pair of pliers to grab the Wuzi steel and pulled it out. Voila! Water splashed everywhere. The instant the Wuzi steel was pulled out of the water, a dazzling silver radiance burst forth from the oil trough, reminiscent of a soaring serpent or the illumination of a silver moon. The cold radiance seemed to have coated the entire cavern in a layer of silver. Success! Looking at the resplendent silver sword before him, Wang Chong felt exceptionally agitated. The flowing patterns on the blade were exceptionally beautiful. At a glance, even the tip of the blade had a deep sawtooth pattern. It felt as though it was a gigantic shark in the deep sea, cold and murderous, yet elegant at the same time. The world's first true Wuzi steel weapon had finally been born in the Central Plains. Wang Chong had personally forged the first king of cold weapons. In that instant, Wang Chong felt incomparably agitated. Voila! The sound of curtains being lifted echoed from behind. Hearing the commotion in the cavern, Wei Hao rushed in with the Wang family's little sister. SSS. What kind of weapon is this? Wei Hao took a few steps forward. Looking at the resplendent weapon in Wang Chong's hands, he took in a deep breath. Wei Hao had never seen such a weapon before. The body of the sword was as shiny as mercury, and there were mysterious natural patterns on it. However, these patterns didn't affect the brilliance of the sword at all. What was most attractive about it was its blade. It was so sharp that it seemed as though it could cut through one's gaze. Wei Hao only took a single glance before he found himself unable to shift his gaze away. What a beautiful and fearsome weapon! Wei Hao muttered to himself. Coming from a noble clan, he had seen many things since young. Even so, he had never seen such a cold and elegant weapon before. It seemed as though it was born for slaughter. It was frightening to the extreme, yet luxurious and beautiful at the same time. With just a single glance, Wei Hao felt as though he had fallen into a nightmare. "It's really beautiful." A tender voice sounded from the side. Wei Hao wasn't the only one whose attention was captivated. The Wang family's little sister stood by the side with her head tilted upward, as though she had lost her soul. Suddenly, the light dimmed. Wang Chong had sheathed the freshly forged Wuzi steel sword into its wooden sheath. Then, he tore a piece of black cloth and wrapped the Wuzi steel sword in layers. "Wei Hao, catch!" Wang Chong casually tossed the Wuzi steel sword over. Wei Hao subconsciously caught it and hugged it in his arms. Looking at the body of the sword covered by the black cloth and sheath, he felt a sense of loss. "Wang Chong, what kind of weapon is this?" Wei Hao asked once more. "This is the Wuzi steel sword that I told you about." Wang Chong replied calmly. He wasn't surprised by Wei Hao's reaction. In fact, he had only seen the body of the sword. He hadn't seen the fearsome might of the Wuzi steel sword yet. When he saw the fearsome might of the Wuzi steel sword on the battlefield, his reaction would be different. Back then, when the Wuzi steel weapon was made into the army's equipment, the first time it appeared on the battlefield, it wasn't just one or two groups of people who were shocked. Back then, when he mentioned the Hyderabad ores project to Wei Hao's reaction was astonished and he thought that Wang Chong had gone mad. These ores weren't worth that much money. But now, Wei Hao's thoughts should have loosened. "Wei Hao, this is the first sword that I have forged. Just take a look at it. Don't let anyone else see it. The first step of the plan has been completed. Based on what I told you before, I will leave the rest to you," Wang Chong said. Wei Hao regained his senses and nodded his head. Parting the curtain, Wang Chong walked out with widened strides. The first Wuzi steel weapon had been forged, but this was just the beginning. More than half a month had passed. If he couldn't gather 90,000 gold taels by the end of the month, Wang Chong's efforts would have been in vain. It was written in black and white on the records of the Court of Judicial Review. Even though it was used by Wang Chong to restrict the two Sindhi Buddhist monks, it was still not enough. But now, it had become Wang Chong's Achilles heel. Those two Sindhi Buddhist monks should be anxious by now. Wang Chong smiled and walked out. What Wang Chong didn't know was that in the white agate jewelry shop, the two Sindhi Buddhist monks were far more anxious than he had imagined. Amitabha. In the room, Ablanadin clasped his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. He appeared calm on the surface, but in reality, his eyebrows were twitching, and he was on edge. "Arloja, do you think that the young master of the Central Plains will go back on his words?" Ablanadin persisted for a long time before he finally couldn't help but ask. It has already been so long, why hasn't there been any movement from his side? 20-some days had passed, and the two of them had waited for so long. Logically speaking, they shouldn't care about the last few days. But for some reason, the two of them felt exceptionally uneasy. Time waited for no man. The famine in Sindhu was only worsening, and many people had already starved to death. Just a few days ago, the two of them had received a letter from the high priest, urging them to return to Sindhu. And this was already the 7th letter they had received this month. Give him another 3 days. If there is still no movement, we can only return to Sindhu and do as the high priest said and sell all of the Hyderabad ores to the Arabs. Arloja sighed. Ever since the contract was formed, the two of them had been paying close attention to Wang Chong's movements every day. However, Wang Chong's side seemed to have sunk into the ocean, not a single movement coming from him. The two of them had gone to the streets to investigate, but there was no news of Hyderabad ores or weapons. At the start, the two of them had been brimming with confidence in Wang Chong, but now, the two of them were growing more and more uneasy. Although Arloja had said that he would give Wang Chong a few more days, in truth, even he had lost all hope. I didn't think that we would still fail. Arloja sighed, returning to his dejected state. Selling the Hyderabad ores in the Central Plains was far more difficult than they had imagined. In addition, isn't there a great clan from the Central Plains? Why don't we try them? Ablanadin mentioned the Zhang clan. He had a deep impression of the people who had paid a visit that day. No. Arloja shook his head. That noble might be decent, but they can't afford the price we are asking for. The swords of the Central Plains are too cheap. They aren't suitable partners. The kind of long-term customer that the High Priest wants us to find doesn't exist in the Central Plains. Ablanadin fell silent. The two of them had clearly come to the same conclusion. Their initial goal in leaving Sindhu was to find a large number of large buyers and gather rations. In addition, they could avoid monopolizing the market. If they were to only sell to the Abbasid Caliphate, their Hyderabad ores wouldn't be able to fetch a high price. It wouldn't do to only sell to a single person. It was precisely because the High Priest was unwilling to see such a situation that he sent them and others to various parts of the world. But from the looks of it now, the Abbasid Caliphate was the most suitable partner. Even though they couldn't fetch a high price, they were loyal and reliable. And the Central Plains was simply too far away. Chapter 47. It's been more than 20 days, and there's still no movement from that kid. In the garden of the Zhang clan, Zhang Jian and Zhang Tsong were seated around a millstone-sized stone table, sipping on tea. The two of them squinted their eyes and carefully tasted it. They looked very proud. How could it be that easy? 90,000 gold taels, that's not a small amount of money. Do you really think it's like eating a meal? Zhang Tsong raised his head and held the teacup in his hand. Besides, under the influence of Duke Zhou's incorruptibility, how could the Wang clan have so much money? Our Zhang clan has hundreds of years of heritage. Even though our family assets are far more than 90,000 gold taels, it is impossible to gather such a sum within a month, let alone them. This is easier said than done. They had been keeping an eye on the Supreme Court. The business in Hyderabad had yet to be completed. In their opinion, Wang Chang's business deal was most likely going to fail. What a pity, that kid is too arrogant. If he had considered it more when we visited him, he wouldn't have ended up like this. Now, not only can we not do business, I'm afraid we'll have to pay a hefty penalty. Zhang Jian raised his head slightly, holding a teacup in one hand and stroking his thick beard with the other. He looked satisfied. Back then, when they went to the white agate jewelry shop and learned that all of the ores in Hyderabad had been bought in advance, and it was the Wang clan, the two of them panicked. But now, the two of them were completely relaxed. In the Central Plains, the name of Duke Zhou resounded like thunder. If the Wang clan wanted to buy it, there was nothing they could do. However, the condition of 90,000 gold taels was a roadblock. No matter how influential the Wang clan was, if they couldn't gather 90,000 gold taels, it would all be for naught. In the end, the Hyderabad ores would have to go to the Zhang family. Now, they were only delaying them for a little bit of time. I really can't figure it out. Duke Zhou's lineage is either devoted to the royal court or the military, but I've never heard of them being interested in iron ores. When I heard that the Hyderabad ore was bought by the Wang family, I thought it was a joke. Why would they want the Sindhi ore? Zhang Jian suddenly asked doubtfully. Duke Zhou is a person of virtue and prestige. In my opinion, there's an 80 to 90% chance that he doesn't know about this matter. I'm afraid that it was done by his descendants. If something really happens, our Zhang clan will have to lend a hand. We can't allow Duke Zhou's reputation to be tarnished. Zhang Tsong replied seriously. Yes, this is actually the patriarch's intention. Zhang Jian nodded. Duke Zhou was a minister of the country, he had rendered meritorious service to the country and the world. If it wasn't for him, the world would have fallen apart long ago. This was also the reason why Duke Zhou was so respected. Duh. Just as the two of them were talking, a young man from the Zhang clan hurriedly walked in. He walked over to Zhang Jian's side, bowed, and whispered into his ear. What? Someone is selling swords at the Blue Bottle Pavilion? Zhang Jian was surprised. Isn't it normal for people to sell their swords? Zhang Tsong sipped on his tea nonchalantly. The capital was rich and populous, so there was nothing strange about selling swords. 600 taels for one. Gold. It hangs on the eaves of the Blue Bottle Pavilion, and no one is allowed to look at it. What? Zhang Tsong spurted a mouthful of tea and nearly choked on it. It wasn't strange for someone to sell swords. After all, there were plenty of steel swords and steel swords. However, a sword for 600 gold taels was a completely different matter. There were only a handful of powers in the world that could reach such a level, and the Zhang clan was one of them. Which clan crossed the line and came to the capital? Don't they know that this is our territory? What did the Huang clan, Qin clan, Li clan, and Lu clan say about it? Zhang Tsong asked. He knew that if it was the Huang, Qing, and Li clan in the capital, there was no need for them to report it. The men they sent have already rushed to the Blue Bottle Pavilion. They aren't aware of this matter either. In fact, they even sent someone to question us. Zhang Jian said. Zhang Tsong furrowed his brows. There were rules in the field of swordsmithing. Every world had its own territory and scope of operations. This wasn't a convention, but something that had formed naturally over the centuries. In the capital, it was basically the territory of the Zhang, Li, Huang, and Lu clan. It wasn't that they wouldn't allow others to sell their swords here. However, if the powers outside the capital were to come here to sell their swords, they should at least inform the Blue Bottle Pavilion beforehand, right? It wasn't that they were domineering, unreasonable, or ostracizing outsiders. Furthermore, this was the rule of the field of swordsmithing. If it were them, as long as they were doing the business of selling or buying swords, they would have to inform the branch in advance. This was a rule that everyone had to abide by. This clan didn't seem to follow the rules at all. Let's go and take a look. Zhang Tsong flung his sleeves and stood up. At the same time, Zhang Jian also stood up and placed down the teacup in his hands. The Blue Bottle Pavilion was a luxurious building with richly ornamented beams and painted rafters. Lifting one's head, it resembled a huge phoenix that was about to soar into the sky. Just like the vast Crane Pavilion, this was a top-notch place to eat and drink tea. However, due to the large number of customers, there were far more people who came here to drink tea and eat snacks than to eat. However, there was something different about the Blue Bottle Pavilion today. Diagonally opposite the entrance of the Blue Bottle Pavilion, there was a metal mountain made of metal ingots. It was 2 meters tall and 1 meter wide. Above the metal mountain was a 3-chi-long sword wrapped in layers of black cloth. It was hung high on the roof. Beside the sword, there was a wooden plaque with a simple line of words on it, 600 gold taels. This metal mountain, sword, and wooden plaque attracted the attention of many. Everyone surrounded it, and indistinctly, one could hear disdainful voices pointing at it, not allowed to see or touch. What kind of sword is this? 600 taels, and it's gold. Is he crazy for money? Why don't you eat me up instead? What is the Blue Bottle Pavilion doing? It's such a good place to eat and drink, and yet, they hung a sword on it. How are they going to continue doing business? On the second floor of the Blue Bottle Pavilion, Wei Hao looked down at the crowd outside. Hearing the disdainful voices, he felt uneasy. He was the young master of the Blue Bottle Pavilion, and he was the one who ordered Wang Chang's sword to be hung up. The disdainful laughter of the crowd outside was equivalent to mocking him. Wang Chong, is this really fine? Wei Hao was perturbed. The Blue Bottle Pavilion is a place where we can drink and rest. Why don't we find a proper sword shop or workshop? There's no need for that, we'll do it here. Wang Chong waved his hands and said resolutely. His eyes were calm and resolute, and there wasn't the slightest hint of wavering. At times, Wei Hao really admired him. It was as though he would never be swayed by external forces. However, is this really fine? I feel a little weird for these people who are here to drink tea to buy a sword. Furthermore, do you think that we can gather 90,000 gold taels for a sword with 600 gold taels? Different from Wang Chong, Wei Hao didn't have much confidence in himself. The place that Wang Chong chose was very remote, and it wasn't a proper place to sell swords. Furthermore, Wei Hao didn't know if 600 gold taels for a sword was expensive or cheap. All in all, the plan to gather 90,000 gold taels shouldn't have existed from the start. Don't worry, I'll definitely be able to gather it. As Wang Chong sipped on his food, he glanced over the railing at the crowd on the street below, his expression calm and unhurried. From the very start, it wasn't an easy task to complete a transaction of 90,000 gold taels. Under normal circumstances, a new famous sword would only be worth 600 to 700 gold taels, and even the best ones wouldn't exceed 1,000 gold taels. If one didn't have any requirements for a sword, an ordinary copper sword would only be worth around 10 to dozens of gold taels each. Under such circumstances, it was impossible to sell a Wuzi steel weapon for a high price. Furthermore, it would take at least 6 to 7 years for the market of Wuzi steel to pick up. Thus, from the very start, Wang Chong had made up his mind that he couldn't use ordinary methods. He had to take an unconventional path. And the Blue Bottle Pavilion was Wang Chong's plan. This place might not be a good location to sell swords, but Wang Chong knew that it had an advantage that no other sword dealer could match up to. Imperial Army. Diagonally opposite the Blue Bottle Pavilion, roughly 100 zhang away, was the main gate of the royal palace. A large group of Imperial Army members was stationed there. And the Blue Bottle Pavilion was the place that all of the Imperial Army members, commanders had to pass by in order to enter the royal palace. The reason why the Blue Bottle Pavilion was made into a place where one could enjoy tea and wine, unlike the vast Crane Pavilion where one could treat guests to a meal, was because the Imperial Army members of the royal palace would frequent this place to relax and amuse themselves. Alcohol was forbidden in the royal palace, and if the Imperial Army members wanted to drink, they could only come to the Blue Bottle Pavilion during the intervals when they were changing shifts. They were generous, thus, the business of the Blue Bottle Pavilion had always been good. Of course, this wasn't the main focus of Wang Chong's attention. With the memories of his previous life, no one was clearer than Wang Chong that in the entire Tang dynasty and the Central Plains, there was no better buyer than the commanders of the Imperial Army. In his previous life, the reason why the price of Wuzi steel weapons from the Abbasid Caliphate could reach several 100,000 gold taels each was due to the presence of these Imperial Army leaders who viewed swords as their lives. As long as it was a weapon that was truly magnificent, sharp, and noble, and could display their noble status, these Imperial Army leaders were the best buyers who could afford the price. In this aspect, even the prestigious clans that were involved in the Wuzi steel business couldn't compare to them. In reality, most of the Imperial Army leaders came from prestigious backgrounds, and they weren't lacking in money at all. Some of the Imperial Army leaders came from prestigious clans. Wang Chong knew that there was no better target than these Imperial Army leaders to raise a huge sum of 90,000 gold taels in a short period of time. In reality, right from the start, Wang Chong's plan to strike it rich in Hyderabad was aimed at these extravagant and wealthy Imperial Army leaders. As long as the goods were good enough, these Imperial Army members would definitely be able to afford the price. However, out of respect for the royal family and the Imperial Army, most of the weapon merchants kept their distance from the Imperial Army. At this moment, other than Wang Chong, almost no one else had noticed the massive purchasing power that the Imperial Army possessed. Chapter 48. Wei Hao, I'll leave the matters here to you. My identity is a little sensitive, so it won't be convenient for me to appear for the time being. Help me hold the fort for the time being. Wang Chong sipped on his tea as he changed the topic. I know. You're worried about Yao Feng, right? Don't worry, leave the matters here to me. There won't be a problem. Wei Hao patted his chest confidently. Even though he had reservations about Wang Chang's plan to sell his sword, Wei Hao wasn't one to shirk responsibility. What was a brother for? A brother was here to help at this moment. Even though the Yao clan was powerful, the Wei clan wasn't one to be trifled with. As a duke, there was no need for them to fear the Yao clan. Yao Feng isn't the only one, Wang Chong chuckled. The matter at the vast crane pavilion wasn't the only matter that he had done. If Yao Guangyi were to know that he was the one who foiled his plans, he would probably skin him alive. The reason why Wang Chong wanted to sell his sword through Wei Hao's Blue Bottle Pavilion was because he didn't want to attract too much attention before his plan succeeded. Otherwise, if the Yao clan were to cause trouble for him and warn those who came to view the sword, it would be more than enough to annoy him. Let's not talk about this anymore. Come, have some tea. Wang Chong filled Wei Hao's cup. As he sipped on his tea, he glanced at the scenery outside the railing. The first day of selling his sword didn't attract too many people. It was impossible for him to accomplish anything with just these few people. However, it was fortunate that Wang Chong didn't expect to sell his sword on the first day, so he wasn't in a hurry. Someone is coming. Suddenly, Wei Hao spoke. Wang Chong's heart jolted. He lifted his head and followed Wei Hao's gaze. A huge commotion could be seen in the distance. A huge group of people was walking toward the Blue Bottle Pavilion from the other end of the street. These people were split into 3 groups, and it was clear that they belonged to 3 different powers. However, they weren't separated from one another, and they were clearly comrades. Not good, it's the capital's Qing clan, Huang clan, and Lu clan. I'm afraid these people are here to cause trouble. Wei Hao was born into a wealthy family, and the people who came and went in his residence were all famous people. Furthermore, the Wei clan also had a smithy, so he immediately recognized the 3 swordsmithing clans the moment they appeared. His eyebrows couldn't help but twitch as he felt extremely uneasy. Judging from the other party's aura, Wei Hao did not think that the other party was here to buy the sword. What are you afraid of? Wang Chong glanced at it and put down the teacup. The capital has its own rules. Even swordsmithing clans wouldn't dare to act recklessly. These people must think that we're foreign aristocratic families or rich families that came to the capital to sell weapons. We've crossed the line. However, we are originally from the capital, so this rule does not apply to us. What are you afraid of? Ah. And this. Wei Hao was surprised. He didn't know much about this kind of thing, and didn't know that there was such a Dao in it. Are you sure? Yes. Wang Chong nodded. In his previous life, he had seen and experienced everything. Even though he looked like a 15-year-old on the outside, he knew much more than Wei Hao. Furthermore, during the turmoil in his previous life, he had come into contact with an old swordsmithing elder. As such, he was well aware of the rules here. This isn't good, they must have misunderstood. I need to quickly explain to them. Wei Hao panicked. There's no need for that, I still have use for them. Wang Chong held onto the lid of the tea gu and said calmly. Ah. Wei Hao was stunned. He stared at Wang Chong, and his mind was unable to process the situation. While Wei Hao was in a daze, the people from the Cheng, Huang, and Lu clans arrived at the Blue Bottle Pavilion. They raised their heads and looked at the swords wrapped in black cloth hanging on the door. Where are the sword sellers? Isn't anyone coming? A burly, fat man who looked very arrogant squinted his eyes and crossed his arms. He glanced at the door of the building for a while and stared at the door for a while. His words were sharp, as if he was saying, I'm here to cause trouble. Sir, are you here to buy a sword? A black-robed young attendant had already rushed out of the Blue Bottle Pavilion. This is your sword. The plump man glanced at him and asked. While he was speaking, everyone from the Cheng, Huang, and Lu clan was looking at him. The man's name was Huang Jiao, and he was from the capital's Huang clan. Of the prestigious clans in the capital, there were blacksmiths and sword sellers, and naturally, there were those who were in charge of causing trouble. Huang Jiao was the most famous of them all. The capital was wealthy, and it was under the feet of the emperor. There were often people who didn't abide by the rules who would come to the capital to sell their swords. This wasn't the first or second time. In order to ensure that others understood the rules, as well as to protect their own interests. Thus, there were people like Huang Jiao in the Huang, Cheng, and Lu clans. "No, this is my master's sword." "Oh, I heard that your clan sells swords for 600 gold taels each." Huang Jiao crossed his arms and spoke with a face full of ridicule. To sell swords before the Huang, Cheng, and Lu clans was simply displaying one's slight skill before an expert. "Yes." The attendant lowered his head and continued to smile along. "Take down your swords and let me take a look," Huang Jiao said impolitely. His expression was still full of ridicule. "If I'm satisfied with it, I might just buy it." The surrounding Huang, Cheng, and Lu clans also looked on with ridicule. This was a common tactic used by the prestigious clans in the capital to deal with foreign powers. Using the excuse of buying a weapon to take a look at the other party's sword, they would then smash the other party's sword down forcefully, creating a gap or even splitting it into two. By then, with so many people watching, it would be an embarrassing sight to behold. This was what it meant to cause trouble. In terms of swordsmithing, there were very few clans that could surpass the Huang, Cheng, Lu, and Zhang clans. "I'm sorry, but you can only buy our swords. You can't see or touch them." The manservant bowed with a smile on his face. "What, you can't look at them? Not even touch them?" In an instant, Huang Jiao, as well as everyone from the Huang, Cheng, and Lu clans, were stunned. 600 gold taels for a sword, and this wasn't silver or copper coins. Yet, they weren't even allowed to touch it. This was unprecedented. When the three great clans arrived, they didn't expect this at all. "I can't even look at it, not even touch it?" Huang Jiao asked once more. He couldn't believe his ears. Those who sold their swords in the capital would always try their best to show off before the crowd. Yet, this shop didn't even allow them to touch the expensive swords they were selling. "You can't." The attendant's voice was as calm as ever. "Who is your master? Call your master out. I would like to see what kind of sword he is for you to not even allow me to touch it." Huang Jiao bellowed furiously. "I don't know." The attendant's voice was as stiff as a rock. "You don't know? What do you mean?" Huang Jiao was taken aback. Then, he sneered furiously. "You don't know where your master is, or you don't know who your master is?" "I don't know who my master is." The attendant's reply was beyond everyone's expectations. Not just Huang Jiao, everyone was stunned as well. "Bullshit. Who doesn't know who their master is?" Huang Jiao flew into a rage. "Fine. If you don't want to speak, I won't ask. Then let me ask you, what's so good about your sword? What gives you the right to set a price of 600 gold taels?" "I don't know." "What about the steel? You don't know where the ore is used to make it?" "I don't know." "How sharp is it? How much can it cut through?" "I don't know." The attendant's reply was as usual. His voice didn't change in the slightest, as if he would only ever say the same three words, "I don't know." This was Wang Chang's intention. Other than the words 600 gold taels and "I can't look at or touch it," there was no need for him to reply. "I don't know, I don't know." "Other than that, what else do you know?" Huang Jiao was about to go insane from anger. He roared furiously, "If you don't have any skills, don't try to sell porcelain." Which sword seller doesn't allow others to look at it? If you can't look at or touch it, do you really think that you are the daughter of a duke? Playing to the gallery. Who? Hearing Huang Jiao's words, the other swordsmithing clans were taken aback for a moment before bursting into laughter. Even the crowd outside also burst into laughter. What did I say? This is a bunch of clowns trying to play to the gallery. I wasn't wrong, right? Huang Jiao pointed at the attendant and laughed heartily. His eyes were filled with disdain. Before coming here, I was still worried that some formidable fellow might have come to the capital to wreak havoc. But from the looks of it now, it seems like we were worrying for nothing. Even though Huang Jiao's words are harsh, he isn't wrong in this matter. This clan is indeed playing to the gallery. A member of the Cheng clan shook his head. The hostility in his eyes was no longer as intense as before, replaced by disdain. It was impossible for the other swordsmithing clans to use such a method to play tricks. As long as the capital's Qing clan used their name, it would be their reputation. There was no need for them to play tricks. Clearly, this clan didn't have any true capability. Even though the other clans didn't say anything, their gazes were the same. Those who were truly capable weren't afraid of others looking at their swords. Not only that, they even hoped for others to see and touch the prowess of their swords. There wasn't anyone like this clan in the capital. In the crowd's view, it was just as Huang Jiao had said, this clan was playing to the gallery. It would be a wonder if such swords could be sold. The Bluebottle Pavilion is a place for drinking, but he actually came here to sell his swords. Furthermore, the price is so high. It seems like he's an outsider. We have overestimated him. The Lu clan members also had disdainful looks on their faces. The Bluebottle Pavilion was richly decorated, and it was definitely one of the top-notch inns in the capital. Those who came here were either wealthy or influential, and most of them came from powerful backgrounds. For the other party to sell a sword for 600 gold taels at such a place, the other clans thought that some formidable foe had come to wreak havoc. But from the looks of it now, they were thinking too much. Once they realized the truth, their strategy changed. Disperse, disperse. This clan doesn't know anything, they are just playing to the gallery. Everyone, disperse. I wonder where this bastard came from to break the rules. What a waste of our time. What are the people from the Bluebottle Pavilion thinking? The Huang, Cheng, and Lu clan members felt disinterested and they scattered in all directions. As they walked, they impatiently chased away the passers-by who were watching the commotion in front of the Bluebottle Pavilion. Those bastards! Wei Hao, who was upstairs, heard their words clearly. He slammed the table angrily and stood up. It's just selling a sword in the capital, what has it got to do with them? Their mouths are filthy. Do they really think that the Huang, Cheng, and Lu clan are the most powerful clans in the capital? I don't believe that I can't deal with them. Wei Hao had grown up together with Wang Chong, and the only person he treasured the most was this good friend of his. To be scolded in front of him, Wei Hao felt extremely uncomfortable, and he was seething with rage. The capital's Qing clan, Huang clan, and Lu clan might be famous, but it was useless against Wei Hao. How could a Gongzi from the Duke of Wei residence think highly of a swordsmithing clan? Wait a moment. A hand reached out to stop Wei Hao. Wang Chong's expression was calm, and he wasn't as agitated as Wei Hao. It's just a small matter, why get angry? Let them be, they are going to disperse soon anyway. As Wang Chong spoke, he slowly chewed on the tea leaves. This was a habit he had before he transcended. After drinking his tea, he would chew on the tea leaves. Chapter 49. But they are already chasing away the passers-by. Can you tolerate that? Wei Hao widened his eyes. He couldn't tolerate it any longer. It was one thing to scold others, but what was with chasing away the passers-by? The reason why Wang Chong hung the sword above the Blue Phoenix Pavilion was to attract the attention of the passers-by. If the passers-by were to be chased away, who would come to buy the sword? Wouldn't Wang Chong's plan be foiled? You said it yourself. They are passers-by, and they are only here to take a look. Do you think that they will come to buy the sword? Wang Chong asked. Wei Hao was at a loss for words. Don't worry, it's nothing much. I have a plan in mind. Wang Chong patted Wei Hao's shoulders and smiled. He didn't think much of the actions of the great swordsmithing clans. If the Wuzi steel sword were to be sold at the price he expected, it was impossible for the great swordsmithing clans to not react. Wang Chong had already expected this. Shifting his body, Wang Chong changed to a more comfortable posture. This way, he could see more clearly. Suddenly, Wang Chong's eyes twitched. What's wrong? Wei Hao asked. I just saw two familiar faces. Wang Chong smiled as he stared into the distance. Through the crowd on the street, Wang Chong saw Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian from the Zhang clan. Since the matter at the Blue Phoenix Pavilion had alarmed the Chen clan, Huang clan, and Lu clan, it was impossible for the Zhang clan to be unaware. Just that, Wang Chong didn't expect to see two familiar faces, Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian. Familiar faces? Do you want to meet them then? Wei Hao asked. There's no need for that. We'll meet when the time comes. Now wasn't the time for him to meet Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian. Before they noticed him, Wang Chong pushed his teacup away and pulled Wei Hao away. What's going on? Why is he here? Unbeknownst to Wang Chong, when he was about to leave, Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian had noticed him as well. Standing in the crowd, the two of them were equally astonished. Although Wang Chong walked very quickly, the two of them had a very deep impression of the youngest son of the Wang family. In particular, the words he said in front of them that day had left a very deep impression on them. Therefore, even though it was just a quick glance, the two of them quickly recognized Wang Chong among the many diners upstairs. When they first received the news, they only heard that someone was selling swords in the Blue Bottle Pavilion. They didn't expect to see Wang Chong here. This was something that the two of them had never heard of before. Don't tell me he's selling swords here. Zhang Jian subconsciously blurted out. Impossible. Zhang Tsong blurted out without any hesitation. The moment he said it, he felt that it was a little inappropriate. He tried to cover it up, but the more he tried to cover it up, the more obvious he was. I mean, maybe it's just a coincidence. He's just here to drink tea. Yes. Zhang Jian replied. Surprisingly, he didn't say anything else. Both of them took large strides towards the Cheng, Huang, and Lu families to greet them. Zhang Tsong, Zhang Jian, you're here. Upon seeing the two of them, the people from the three clans who were acquainted with them immediately walked forward to welcome them. It's just a fellow who came from nowhere trying to please the crowd. Tell your clan head not to pay him any heed. You can return now. I see. After asking the three clans about the details of the matter, the two of them heaved a long sigh of relief. We'll report this matter to our clan head. Even though they said so, for some reason, the two of them were in a daze. Almost simultaneously, they thought of Wang Chong, who had appeared on the second floor of the Blue Bottle Pavilion. Wang Chong's appearance made the two of them feel uneasy. I hope that it isn't what I think it is. With such thoughts in mind, the two of them quickly turned around and left. No one noticed that a leader of the Imperial Army was standing in the crowd in front of the gate tower. He was stroking the stubble on his chin as he looked at the sword hanging in front of the gate tower with an amused expression. After the ruckus caused by the three great swordsmithing clans, the entrance of the Blue Bottle Pavilion was completely deserted. In the view of the few great clans, this matter had come to an end. However, what no one expected was that after a day of peace, the Blue Bottle Pavilion caused an even bigger commotion on the second day, attracting the attention of many people once more. 1,200 gold taels. This was the latest price of the sword in the Blue Bottle Pavilion. Compared to the first day, the price had doubled. Furthermore, the owner of the sword even released a statement through the Blue Bottle Pavilion. The sword on the pavilion would only be sold for 2 hours a day. After 2 hours, even if one wanted to buy it, it would not be sold. Furthermore, no one was allowed to look or touch it. 1,200 gold taels. Is he insane? In the Qin clan's residence in the capital, an elder's eyes widened when he heard the price, as though they were about to pop out of their sockets. Who does that bastard think he is? How could he dare to sell a sword for 1,200 gold taels? Furthermore, it's gold. Even our Qing clan doesn't dare to sell it at such a high price. Who does he think he is? Does he think that the people in the capital are fools? What is the Bluebottle Pavilion thinking, to allow him to cause such a ruckus? He was present at the Bluebottle Pavilion yesterday. Even if he wanted to please the crowd, there should be a limit to it. What he couldn't understand the most was the Bluebottle Pavilion. In the capital, the Bluebottle Pavilion was quite influential. To allow someone to cause such a ruckus, how was he going to continue doing business in the future? How is it? Is there any news on the matter I asked you to look into? The elder of the Qing clan, Qing Yuqing, put down the letter in his hands. Pausing for a moment, he turned to the disciple who delivered the letter and asked. Reporting to elder, I've looked into it. It's said that the one who sold the sword is a friend of the boss of the Bluebottle Pavilion. It's hard to let go of an old friendship, so he put it up for sale there. What should we do? Elder, they're ruining our business. Should we take a look or warn them? The Qing clan disciple asked. Preposterous. The elder of the Qing clan, Qing Yuqing, glared at him and reprimanded, do we have to follow a child's ruckus as well? How can this be? A sword that costs 1,200 gold taels, do you think that he will be able to sell it? Let him cause a ruckus for a while, and after a period of time, he will calm down. Yes, elder. The disciple who spoke hurriedly lowered his head in fear. He didn't say anything else. No one would spend 1,200 taels of gold to buy a weapon without knowing the ins and outs of the weapon. This price was far beyond the market. Any normal person would never buy it. As long as no one went to buy it, this matter would naturally turn into a farce and be left unsettled. This was the attitude of the Cheng, Huang, and Lu great swordsmithing clans. To them, the matter at the Bluebottle Pavilion was just a storm caused by a nobody. It wasn't worth their attention, and it wasn't worth making a huge fuss over. After all, they had their own standing. However, in the capital, the atmosphere in another clan was completely different. How is it? Have you investigated it? At the same time, in the inner residence of the Zhang clan, Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian had a grim expression on their faces. The atmosphere was completely different from the other clans. I've investigated it. The Bluebottle Pavilion is a business of the Duke of Wei residence. It seems that the Gongzi of the Duke of Wei specially requested the shopkeeper to hang the sword at the pavilion. The Zhang clan disciple bowed and clasped his hands respectfully. The Gongzi of the Duke of Wei. Do you know which Gongzi it is? Zhang Jian's expression tensed up and he hurriedly asked. It seems to be Gongzi Wei Hao. The Zhang clan disciple replied. Wang. Upon hearing this name, Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian stared at one another, and their faces changed. You can leave first. Zhang Jian waved his hands. After the Zhang clan disciple left, the duo stared at one another. The atmosphere froze, and no one spoke. This isn't good. Isn't that Wei Hao the one who is close to Wang Chong? In the end, Zhang Tsong was the first to speak. He frowned worriedly. Due to the issue with the Hyderabad ores, they had been paying close attention to Wang Chong. Naturally, they were also paying attention to the people around him. Wei Hao was one of them. Regarding the Hyderabad ores, the duo didn't believe that the Wang clan was intending to dabble in the blacksmithing industry and purchase the Hyderabad ores. The Wang clan didn't have any experience in this aspect. From the bottom of their hearts, they didn't believe that Wang Chong was serious. Thus, they didn't think too much of it. However, if the one who sent the sword at the Bluebottle Pavilion was Wang Chong, then everything would be different. It didn't matter if Wang Chong could succeed or not. No matter how absurd his actions were, he had actually done it and even forged a sword. Just this unexpected turn of events was enough to make the two of them uneasy, even panicked. No one liked variables. Without a doubt, the Hyderabad ores were already showing signs of unease. This matter isn't looking good. He can't really be forging a sword, right? Zhang Jian felt uneasy as well. No matter what, we have to be cautious. Even though I don't believe that a child could be so formidable, the matter regarding the Hyderabad ores is of great importance to us. We should quickly report this matter to the clan head. The two of them quickly stood up and hurried into the room. 1,200 gold taels. To an ordinary person in the Central Plains, this was a huge sum of money that they wouldn't be able to spend even after several lifetimes. Yet, this was only the price of a sword. Just when many people thought that this was an unattainable, high price, the actions of the Blue Bottle Pavilion on the third day refreshed everyone's understanding of the world. 2,400 gold taels. This was the latest price at the entrance of the Blue Bottle Pavilion. The person at the entrance of the Blue Bottle Pavilion seemed to be determined to shock everyone with his words. In his heart, there didn't seem to be any concept of price. When this latest price was announced, the entire weapon market in the capital burst into an uproar. Regardless of who the person at the entrance of the Blue Bottle Pavilion was, even if it was a prank, his actions had successfully attracted everyone's attention. 2,400 gold taels. Of the thousands of sword shops and smiths in the capital, there wasn't a single one who dared to offer such a sky-high price. Yet, this unknown owner of the Blue Bottle Pavilion managed to do what others didn't dare to do. Not only so, on the first day, 600 gold taels. On the second day, 1,200 gold taels. On the third day, 2,400 gold taels. Many people could tell that the person at the entrance of the Blue Bottle Pavilion wasn't just raising the price. His price had risen by an entire fold from the previous day. How daring must he be to do such a thing? Lunatic, this fellow is truly a lunatic. Isn't that right? What kind of sword can be worth 2,400 gold taels for a sword to be worth such a price? Anyone who isn't a lunatic would be able to do such a thing. More importantly, he isn't even allowed to look or touch it. Who in the world would sell a sword like that? Otherwise, why would I say that he's a lunatic? Outside the Blue Bottle Pavilion, the crowd was laughing and pointing at the commotion. In any case, it was free to watch the commotion. Furthermore, the Blue Bottle Pavilion was even giving out delicious pastries to the crowd. Chapter 50. It was one thing if it was an ordinary person, but with the endorsement of the Blue Bottle Pavilion, the matter was completely different. In any case, this matter attracted the attention of more and more people in the capital. When this matter reached the ears of the Cheng, Huang, and Lu clans, the initially nonchalant swordsmithing clans couldn't maintain their composure. However, what the Cheng, Huang, and Lu clans didn't expect was that an even greater change would occur on the evening of the third day. It was this unexpected incident that changed the nature of the matter, as well as the view the other clans had of the Blue Bottle Pavilion. 2,400 gold taels, this should be the most expensive sword pavilion in the Central Plains. The sun was setting in the west, and in the evening, no one noticed a bearded Western region merchant appearing at the Blue Bottle Pavilion. This Western region merchant was called Mozaid, and he was a sword merchant from the Western Karak Spazinu. Karak Spazinu, or Iraq, was known as Karak Spazinu in ancient times. Different from other sword merchants, Mozaid didn't treat swords as a business. Instead, he treated it as a hobby that he would dedicate his life to. Mozaid loved swords, and his love for them had reached an insane level. Toward those top-notch swords, he had a passion that came from deep within his bones. If he were to see such a sword, he would do everything in his power to buy it. Mozaid had set his sights on the world. His wish in life was to see all the best treasured swords and sabers in the world. Thus, the first thing Mozaid did upon arriving at the Central Plains was to visit all of the sword shops and smiths in the capital of the Tang dynasty. But none of the swords there could catch his eye. This place should be the most prestigious sword tower in the Central Plains. Mozaid thought as he looked at the signboard on the pavilion. After visiting the thousands of sword shops in the capital of the Tang dynasty, this was the most expensive place he had seen. There wasn't a single sword shop or smithing shop that could match up to this. 2,400 gold taels. Even in the Abbasid Caliphate and Karak-Spazinu, this was an extremely rare price. Mozaid didn't understand the Central Plains, but according to the rules of Karak-Spazinu, only the best swordsmiths and the best swordsmiths would dare to sell their swords at the highest price. Without a doubt, this was the best sword pavilion in the Central Plains. Those who dared to sell weapons here must be the best swordsmiths. Before coming here, I heard that the market for weapons in the Central Plains is far inferior to that of the Abbasid Caliphate and Karak-Spazinu, but from the looks of it, that's not the case at all. The owner of this sword tower must be very confident that he dared to wrap a sword worth more than 2,000 taels of silver in black cloth. He didn't even need to show it to others. Mozaid had learned a little of the language of the Central Plains, so he could vaguely recognize some of the words on the door. He couldn't help but feel impressed. Abbasid Caliphate and Karak-Spazinu had a large number of top-notch swordsmiths, and their smithing industry was rather developed. However, even the most formidable swordsmithing master wouldn't dare to do as this sword pavilion did, wrapping up their swords and sabers for others to see. In the eyes of the people of Karak-Spazinu, such a master must be the most formidable in the Central Plains. Mozaid immediately felt a strong desire to meet the most formidable sword master of the Central Plains. Clack! Thinking of this, Mozaid immediately walked toward the Bluebottle Pavilion. However, after taking a few steps, a gust of wind blew past. Ah! My scarf! Not too far away, the exclamation of a lady could be heard. Amidst the wind, a green scarf fluttered in the air. Mozaid didn't pay much attention to it initially, but after taking a few steps, he realized that the green scarf was flying toward his face. Master, be careful. A few loyal Karak-Spazinu guards immediately rushed over. Ha! Upon seeing this sight, Mozaid chuckled. Without waiting for the guards to rush over, he placed his hand on his waist. Shwa! A cold light flashed, and the silk scarf, which was as light as a feather, was immediately cut into 2 pieces. The 2 pieces fell to the ground. The Karak-Spazinu guards stopped in their tracks. From afar, the lady's scream came to an abrupt halt. She stared in Mozaid's direction with a shocked expression. Cutting through a single strand of hair. This was the standard of the best swordsmiths in Karak-Spazinu. Mozaid sliced apart the green scarf in the air and chuckled. Then, he sheathed his saber at his waist with an arrogant expression. This was his best sword and it was also his favorite sword and saber. Bring 2 gold ingots over to compensate that lady. Leaving behind these words, Mozaid walked into the Bluebottle Pavilion with widened strides. Behind him, 2 Karak-Spazinu guards grabbed 2 gold ingots and hurried over to the stunned lady. Putting aside the matter at the Bluebottle Pavilion, in the Wang family residence, after handing over the matter of the Wuzi steel sword to Wei Hao, Wang Chong began to focus on his martial arts. With the panther bone, I can cultivate some of the cultivation techniques from my previous life. Early in the morning, in the Wang family's back garden, Wang Chong was playing with a string of pearls as thoughts flashed through his mind. Possessing the memories of his previous life, Wang Chong had too many cultivation techniques from his previous life in his mind. However, most of these destructive cultivation techniques were limited by Wang Chong's root bone, making it impossible for him to cultivate them. However, things were different now. Even though Wang Chong's root bone wasn't very strong, he was still able to cultivate it. However, after obtaining the panther bone, he could start practicing some of the basic and low-level cultivation techniques from his previous life. I'll cultivate the Herculean punch. After contemplating for a long moment, Wang Chong finally made up his mind. In his previous life, when the steel horsemen from the foreign lands appeared out of nowhere, their powerful defense rendered the soldiers of all the countries at the bottom of the hierarchy helpless. That was until the invention of the Herculean punch. This fist technique stacked the strength of one's entire body together like a tidal wave. With a single punch, a low-level soldier would be able to exert strength several times that of their own. Thus, the current situation was changed. Honestly speaking, this kind of fist technique was not a very brilliant technique. But in the origin energy realm, it was definitely the strongest cultivation technique. Given Wang Chang's current situation, this fist technique from the military was the most suitable for him. Gongzi, someone is looking for you outside. Just when Wang Chong was about to start cultivating, Shenlong's voice suddenly sounded by his ear. It's the two Buddhist men. Oh. Wang Chong pondered for a moment before smiling. He already understood what was going on. After such a long time, they should be making some movements by now. Let them in. Yes. Shenlong turned around and left quickly. In just a moment, two figures walked in with fluttering sleeves. Gongzi. Ablanadin and Arloja bowed, speaking in Sanskrit. Masters, you're getting impatient already? Wang Chong faintly smiled, apparently already knowing why they had come. Gongzi, I'm truly sorry. It's just that this matter is extremely important to us. Back then, we made an agreement with Gongzi that as long as Gongzi can fork out 90,000 gold taels within a month, you will obtain the 300 jun of ores we have and the rights to sell the Hyderabad ores in the Central Plains. It's been so long now, and it's not far from the 1-month deadline. I wonder how Gongzi is doing. The two of them clasped their palms together and asked apologetically. Ha, masters, are you suspecting that I can't fork out 90,000 gold taels? Wang Chong heartily laughed as he made clear the purpose of their visit. Gongzi, please don't blame us. This matter is of great importance. Having their intentions exposed by Wang Chong, the two of them felt awkward and ashamed. But after hesitating for a while, he decided to tell the truth. Young master, I won't hide it from you. Our Sindhu is currently suffering from a severe famine, and with every passing day, more people die. During this period of time, Hyderabad had written several letters urging them. We have no choice but to be anxious. The two of them looked anxious as they spoke. This was not an act. The situation in Sindhu was already very serious. If the situation was serious, the two of them would definitely not rush Wang Chong. You don't have to worry. As for the matter of 90,000 taels of gold, I will be able to gather the money within this period of time. As for Sindhu, if you are worried, I can first contact the Turkic merchants and have them gather a batch of cattle and sheep to send to your Sindhu. Although Wang Chong didn't have much gold left, cattle and sheep weren't as expensive as swords. 100 taels of gold could still buy a lot of cattle and sheep. Really? The two of them were surprised and delighted. Looking at Wang Chong, they felt extremely moved. The western border of the Turkic Khaganate was much closer to Sindhu than the Central Plains. If Wang Chong could contact the Turkic merchants and have them send some cattle and sheep over, it would be great for Sindhu. Given Sindhu's situation, this was a timely help. Even though Wang Chong didn't have such an obligation at the moment. Of course. Wang Chong smiled and nodded. No one knew better than him that Sindhu was in need of help at this moment. There was nothing more worthwhile than using a little bit of help to exchange for their gratitude. A drop of water should be repaid with a spring of water, this saying was applicable to all corners of the world. In the future negotiations for the Hyderabad ores, these things would be of great help. As for the matter of the 90,000 taels of gold, if you don't believe me, follow me. The matter of the cattle and sheep was a matter for the future. It would take at least 10 days before they reached Sindhu. However, the matter of 90,000 taels of gold was urgent. Words alone were no proof. Since the two monks already had doubts in their hearts, they would not be at ease without concrete evidence. All of this was within Wang Chong's expectations. Wang Chong didn't stand on ceremony. He called for a carriage and brought the two of them straight to Blue Bottle Pavilion. c. 2,400 taels. Gold. Wang Chong added with a smile. Standing among the crowd, the two Cindy monks glanced at one another and saw the deep shock in the other's eyes. Wang Chong chuckled inwardly. They had arrived early today, but the price they saw was still the same as yesterday. If they were to wait until noon and see that 2,400 taels had become 4,800 taels, they would be even more shocked. 2,400 taels. Have the swords of the Central Plains become so expensive? The two of them didn't recognize the words of the Central Plains, but they were still able to recognize 2,400. This price left them deeply astonished. The two of them didn't expect the weapon market of the Central Plains to have flourished to such an extent. Is this the weapon you forged? Wang Chong nodded his head and didn't deny it. Now, are you still worried that I won't be able to take out 90,000 gold taels? It's fine, it's fine. The two of them hurriedly waved their hands, but their hearts were filled with excitement. If a weapon could be sold for more than 2,000 gold taels, then 90,000 gold taels wouldn't be a problem for this noble Gongzi. If they could really raise 90,000 gold taels within a month, it would be great news for Sinu. Recalling how they doubted whether Wang Chong would be able to take out 90,000 gold taels, the two of them felt ashamed. When Wang Chong saw the ashamed expressions on their faces, he inwardly chuckled. Selling a weapon for 2,400 gold taels and selling it for 2,400 gold taels were two completely different concepts. Even though the two Sindhi Buddhist monks were tasked with promoting the Hyderabad ores, it was clear that they weren't too familiar with the market for such weapons. It's fortunate that they don't speak the same language and can only speak Sanskrit. Otherwise, it would be hard to fool them. Wang Chong was also rejoicing inwardly. Masters, let's go up and have some tea. Chapter 51. Wang Chong, Wang Chong. You're finally here. If you were any later, I might not be able to hold on any longer. The moment Wang Chong entered the Blue Bottle Pavilion, Wei Hao rushed out anxiously. His forehead was filled with sweat. What's wrong? Wang Chong frowned as he stared at Wei Hao in astonishment. Wei Hao had a carefree personality, and as such, he rarely paid attention to anything. This was the first time Wang Chong saw him so anxious. Something has happened, something huge has happened. Someone is here to cause trouble. Wei Hao stuttered. He was so anxious that his tongue was tied. Don't panic, speak slowly. Even if the sky falls, I'll hold it up. What do you mean by causing trouble? Wang Chong said as he gestured for Wei Hao to calm down. Perhaps it was Wang Chong's aura that worked. Wei Hao gradually calmed down. Only then did he speak of the matter. Yesterday evening, just as Wei Hao was preparing to return, a merchant from Mo's Aid Carrick Spazinu suddenly appeared. This fellow spoke in a half-baked Chinese, and the moment he walked up, he started talking about the swords and sabers of the Central Plains. He said that he couldn't think of anything and that it was better than the West. Wei Hao thought that he had met a sucker and he was delighted. Unexpectedly, this fellow suddenly took out a saber and saber, intending to compete with Wang Chong. Only then did Wei Hao realize that this bastard was here to cause trouble. Wei Hao was infuriated, so he wanted the other party to leave. He didn't expect this fellow to start acting at this moment, saying that his language wasn't good and that he couldn't understand him. In any case, he stubbornly refused to stay in the Blue Bottle Pavilion, intending to compete with the saber and saber that Wang Chong hung on the pavilion. Wei Hao had been arguing with him for a very long time, and it had attracted the attention of many people. In fact, it was starting to affect the business of the Blue Bottle Pavilion. Wei Hao wanted to chase him away, but this fellow was in the saber and sword business. As long as he didn't break the rules, Wei Hao couldn't chase him away. Wang Chong, if you don't come, I won't be able to hold on. That fellow had been clamoring to hang his weapon on the Blue Bottle Pavilion to display it to everyone. If you can hang on it, why can't he? Furthermore, it was rumored that it was rising to the Central Plains and Carrick Spazinu. I really can't do anything to him. Wei Hao spat out all the words he had been holding back in one breath. This time, when Wang Chong sold the sword, he had thought that it would be a simple transaction. You buy, I sell. He did not expect it to be so complicated. What about that Carrick Spazinu merchant? Wang Chong said. Inside. I stalled him temporarily and said that I would wait for you to come over. As soon as Wang Chong appeared, Wei Hao calmed down as if he had found his pillar of support. Let's go, take me to him. Wang Chong left the two Bengu poison monks behind and got someone to arrange a private room. Then, he quickly left with Wei Hao. In a compartment within the Bluebottle Pavilion, Wang Chong finally met the Carrick Spazinu merchant that Wei Hao spoke of. You're Mo's aide. Wang Chong stared at the bearded man in front of him. You're the owner of that sword? Mo's aide stared at Wang Chong in astonishment. He didn't expect that the owner of the sword would be a child in his teens. However, upon seeing Wang Chong nod his head, Mo's aide quickly tossed all of this to the back of his mind. His passion for famed swords and sabers had long made him disregard everything else. Age and the like were not within his consideration at all. Great. I like your sword a lot. You must be an incredible sword master. This is the treasured saber of our Carrick Spazinu, as well as my most treasured saber. I would like to compete with you. Mo's aide immediately stood up from the rattan chair with a passionate expression. Didn't I already tell you that you can't? Wei Hao flew into a rage. Why didn't this fellow listen to him? If not for the Chamberlain of Dependency's order to treat foreign guests and merchants with courtesy, he would have long chased them out. Sure. Wang Chong said. These two simple words seemed to have infinite magic power. The entire private room suddenly became deathly silent. Wei Hao stared at Wang Chong in a daze. His mouth was wide open, and he couldn't believe his ears. He hurriedly looked for Wang Chong and tried his best to stall for time so that Wang Chong wouldn't agree to his request. Otherwise, he would have agreed to it yesterday. But he hadn't expected Wang Chong to agree to the matter that he had refused for so long, and without the slightest hesitation. On the other side, Mo's aide was also surprised. He had been to other swordsmiths and smiths in the capital, and the other party would still be enthusiastic at the start. However, whenever he made such a request, the other party would always reject him and chase him out. This noble Gongzi, Wei Hao, tried his best to reject his request. Mo's aide was prepared to spend a lot of effort to convince the swordsmith, but he didn't expect the other party to agree to his request so readily. This was something that even Mo's aide did not expect. Wang Chong, you're insane. Wei Hao finally reacted. Ignoring Mo's aide's presence, he grabbed Wang Chong's arm and pulled him to the next room. That fellow is clearly here to cause trouble. You know that he doesn't have good intentions, so why did you agree to his request? Wei Hao asked with a hushed voice, agitated. Wang Chong's decision had caught him off guard. Even now, he still couldn't accept the huge difference between the situation and his expectations. Calm down. Wang Chong smiled and gestured for Wei Hao to calm down. Honestly speaking, right from the start, Wang Chong's plan was to deal with the imperial army. The merchants of the western regions weren't part of his considerations at all. However, Mo's aide's appearance had provided an additional opportunity for Wang Chong. As long as he made good use of it, this matter would only benefit him. This Mo's aide doesn't have any ill intentions. He's not doing this for the reason you think he's here to cause trouble. Wang Chong explained with a smile. Wei Hao didn't know much about this Mo's aide, but with the decades of memories from his previous life, Wang Chong knew that Mo's aide didn't have any ill intentions. This involved the habits of the Central Plains, Abbasid Caliphate and Carrick Spazinu. In Abbasid Caliphate and Carrick Spazinu, people had a habit when purchasing swords. They liked to compare their swords with the other party's. If the quality of the other party's sword was higher and could break their own sword, or even make a dent in the blade, then they would happily buy the better sword. Otherwise, they would abandon it. In Charax-Spasinu and Abbasid Caliphate, this was a normal behavior, and it was tacitly accepted by the entire industry. Through this kind of behavior, those low-quality swords were quickly eliminated. As for the remaining swords, most of them were of superior quality, and there wasn't much of a difference between them. Through this behavior, Charax-Spasinu and Abbasid Caliphate promoted the advancement of the entire industry, causing the quality of weapons in the West to rise. Those top-notch swords were able to fetch a price commensurate with their quality, and the standing of swordsmiths rose significantly. They were highly respected in the West. After a long period of time, the weapon market in Abbasid Caliphate and Charax-Spasinu flourished, far surpassing that of the Central Plains. In the West, everyone in Abbasid Caliphate and Charax-Spasinu benefited from this. In Wang Chong's memories, a few years later, the Abbasid Caliphate and Charax-Spasinu sword merchants would enter the Central Plains on a large scale, and they would bring this behavior to the Central Plains as well. The weapons of the East and the West would clash with one another, the smithing skills would clash with one another, and the habits of the people would clash with one another. In Wang Chong's memories, it was only after the weapon merchants in the Central Plains started to accept this behavior that the price of weapons in the Central Plains started to rise. Only competition could bring about prosperity. Only when the Central Plains accepted and got used to such competition would the weapon market of the Central Plains welcome a true leap forward. When swordsmiths started to spend more time and effort on their weapons, when the requirements for the weapons they forged became more stringent, only then would the weapon market of the Central Plains welcome a qualitative leap forward. Those top-notch weapons were able to fetch an even higher price in the market, and after the swordsmiths reaped high profits, they would then forge even more top-notch weapons. This was the trend of the world, and it was a virtuous cycle. Everyone benefited from it. It was precisely because Wang Chong knew of this trend that he didn't reject it. Furthermore, if he were to make use of this situation well, it would be beneficial to his plans. But even so, you shouldn't have agreed to their request. Wei Hao listened to Wang Chong's explanation of the trading habits of Charax-Spasinu. His expression was tense, and worry filled his heart. You might not know how sharp the weapons of the Abbasid Caliphate and Charax-Spasinu are. Those swords can cut through a hair with a single blow. There was once a merchant from the western regions who gifted a curved blade to my father, and it easily sliced through a famed blade that my father collected. I witnessed it with my own eyes. If I knew how formidable those fellows were, I wouldn't have rejected them. Wei Hao was worried. In the Central Plains, the swords of the West weren't well known yet. However, due to his father's relationship with the Duke of Wei, Wei Hao knew how formidable the weapons of the Abbasid Caliphate and Charax-Spasinu were. So, you're worried that I might lose to him? Wang Chong chuckled. Wei Hao was speechless. Don't worry, I know how formidable the swords I forge are. I won't lose to him. Wang Chong smiled faintly. Of course, Wang Chong knew how formidable the weapons of the Abbasid Caliphate and Charax-Spasinu were. After all, he had witnessed it in his previous life. However, Wang Chong was more confident in his weapons. In this era, it was impossible for a weapon that was more formidable than Wuzi's steel to exist. After consoling Wei Hao, Wang Chong walked back into Mosade's compartment. Master! You agreed. Upon seeing Wang Chong enter, Mosade's eyes lit up. Don't worry, I know that the rules of the Central Plains are different from Charax-Spasinu. If your weapon is damaged, I will compensate you. If you are able to damage my saber, that would be even better. I am willing to pay a higher price to buy your saber. There's no need for compensation. As for buying it, we can talk about it when the time comes. Wang Chong chuckled. 2,400 gold taels was the price on the third day. If this Charax-Spasinu merchant thought that this was the price of his weapon, he would be sorely mistaken. Wang Chong wasn't prepared to sell the world's first true Wuzi steel weapon so cheaply. That would be a huge loss for him. Can I take a look at that famous saber of yours? Chapter 52. Of course. Mosaid said nonchalantly. He unsheathed the treasured saber from his waist. His right hand gripped the saber hilt, and he drew it out with a swoosh. Clang! The moment the treasured saber was unsheathed, a cold light shot out and circled the entire room. Even the temperature dropped. The entire room fell silent, and Wei Hao's expression changed. This treasured saber was even more powerful than the one he had seen at his father's, the Duke of Wei. This Mosaid of Karak Spazinu wasn't lying. The sword in his hand was indeed a famous one. Ordinary swords and sabers could not compare to this kind of cold chi. There probably weren't many in the Central Plains who could compare to him. Here. Mosaid handed the knife over. Good saber. Wang Chong didn't stand on ceremony. He took the saber from Mosaid's hands and examined it carefully. Since his rebirth, this was the first time he had seen a famous sword of Karak Spazinu. It was different from the Central Plains. The Central Plains revered the sword, while the Abbasid Caliphate revered the saber. Furthermore, the shape of their sabers was completely different from the sabers of the Central Plains. First of all, they were not long, only about a foot long. Furthermore, the sabers were curved like the crescent moon in the sky. Wang Chong did not know if this had anything to do with the worship of the moon in the Abbasid Caliphate and Karak Spazinu. The blade of Mosaid's Karak Spazinu was extremely sharp. One could tell that it had been tempered 1,000 times. As the saying goes, the fall of a single leaf reveals the arrival of autumn. From the forging of this saber, it can be seen that the forging standards of the weapons of the Abbasid Caliphate and Karak Spazinu were indeed very high. In some aspects, they were even higher than the Central Plains. Shua, Wang Chong flicked his wrist, and a cold light flashed past. In the private room, a corner of the table made of hard sandalwood immediately fell without a sound. The corner of the table fell to the ground with a clang. Good saber. Wang Chong praised. At the side, Wei Hao's expression changed. Wang Chong held the saber with both hands, waved it around, and returned the famed saber. Mr. Mosaid, why don't we change the rules? Since it was a contest of swords and sabers, there should be rules for the contest. If you can beat me, I will compensate you for the price of my sword. And if you lose? I don't want you to pay the price of a sword, 1,200 taels of gold. Wei Hao, there will be more people who come to challenge me in the future. I can't possibly meet them one by one. Let's just follow this rule. Wang Chong. Wei Hao was shocked. With a single look, he could tell that Mosaid's saber wasn't ordinary. Just when he wanted to remind Wang Chong not to agree to it, he didn't expect Wang Chong to raise such strict conditions. Ha ha ha, good. Mosaid rejoiced. No matter what conditions Wang Chong raised, as long as he agreed, 1,200 gold taels was nothing. The majority of Karak Spazinu merchants were extremely wealthy and had been doing business for generations. As long as they could achieve their goals, they didn't care about this small amount of money. Furthermore, Wang Chong's conditions were clearly advantageous to him. If he lost, he wouldn't have to compensate, but if he won. It had been a long time since Mosaid had met someone who could defeat him. Mosaid couldn't wait for Wang Chong to win. This way, he would be able to buy an even better sword. However, there's one more thing. I'm unable to have a sword duel with you now. If you wish to compete with me, you will have to wait until the 7th day. Wang Chong said. No problem, it's a small matter. Mosaid laughed heartily, not minding Wang Chong's words. As long as Wang Chong agreed to it, waiting for 7 days was nothing. Right, there's something I'm curious about. When I entered, I saw a massive metal mountain at your entrance. I wonder what it's used for. There has never been such a situation in our Karak Spazinu. Hee, you will know in 7 days' time. Wang Chong chuckled. After saying those words, he turned around and left. Right, if you don't mind, before our duel, I would like to hang my Karak Spazinu saber up here as well. Is it possible? After taking a few steps, Mosaid's voice sounded behind him. There was a hint of craftiness in his voice. Business is business. The reason why he came to the Central Plains wasn't just for a sword duel. Wang Chong chuckled. Just like what he remembered, these Abbasid Caliphate and Karak Spazinu saber merchants wouldn't let go of any opportunity to promote themselves. However, Mosaid didn't know that his thoughts were playing into Wang Chong's hands. This was exactly what Wang Chong wanted him to do. Sure. After saying those words, Wang Chong walked out of the booth. Wang Chong, you're mad. Do you know that this will lead to a huge problem? Walking out of the room, Wei Hao hurriedly chased after Wang Chong with a flustered expression. According to the price of the sword, do you know how much it is? 2,400 taels. No, it's 4,800 taels. If you win, you won't even earn half of it. If you lose, you will have to pay so much. What in the world are you thinking? We don't even know if we can gather the 90,000 gold taels for the Hyderabad ores, and we have to pay the 1,700 gold taels for the 8 Gods Pavilion in a month's time. Yet, you're doing this now. You're going to bring disaster to your family. Wei Hao's face flushed red from anxiety. Wang Chong had tried Mosaid's saber before, and it was even sharper than the one his father kept. Even though Wang Chong had witnessed the other party's prowess, he still agreed to it. Wei Hao didn't expect this. The reason why he agreed to Wang Chong's request to sell the Wuzi steel sword at the Blue Bottle Pavilion was to help his brother earn some money. The two of them were brothers who had grown up together, so it was impossible for him not to help. However, Wei Hao didn't expect such a simple matter to turn out like this. Not only would Wang Chong be unable to earn money, he would even bring disaster to the Wang clan and compensate them with a huge sum of money. And he was one of the accomplices. For the first time, Wei Hao felt regret. Furthermore, what do you mean by follow the rules? If more of such people were to appear, do you know how much money you'll have to pay? Just the thought of the rules set by Wang Chong made Wei Hao feel like his internal organs were on fire. Don't worry, he won't be able to win. Wang Chong said calmly. Do you know? What? What did you just say? Wei Hao was stunned. I said that he won't be able to win. Wang Chong chuckled as he repeated his words. Wei Hao stared at Wang Chong in a daze, and for a moment, he was speechless. He was originally filled with anger, but when he heard these words, all of his anger immediately dissipated. He won't be able to win. Wei Hao found it hard to believe. He had witnessed the sharpness of the saber in the suite. Wang Chong said calmly. His expression was filled with confidence. This was the confidence he had in himself, as well as the confidence he had in the Wuzi steel sword. Wei Hao was instantly stunned. He had 1,000 words in his heart, but in the face of Wang Chong's domineering and arrogant words, he couldn't say a single word. He didn't know where Wang Chong got his confidence from, to actually dare to boast that he would definitely win. He had personally experienced Mosaid's Karak Spazinu saber. That was a top-notch saber, so sharp that it was suffocating, and so sharp that it made one's heart palpitate. Just a glance at it would probably give one nightmares at night. This was also the reason why he kept reminding Wang Chong to reject the challenge. Although Wang Chong's sword was not bad, to be honest, Wei Hao had no confidence in it. Can you really win? Wei Hao hesitated. Of course. Wang Chong smiled, brimming with confidence. He wasn't a fool. When he received the machete, he had specially tested it out. He used his pinky to secretly tap on the tip of the blade. The other party's saber was indeed sharp, but the blade was made of ordinary steel. It couldn't be compared to the Hyderabad ores. Furthermore, the other party had only comprehended one or two of the 3 processes of swordsmithing. From this, Wang Chong could deduce that the black-clothed Abbasid Caliphate and Karak Spazinu swordsmiths were still a distance away from him. At the very least, it would be impossible for them to catch up to him in the next few years. Given the level of craftsmanship, it was impossible for the other party to match up to his Wuzi's steel weapon. Alright, I believe you. Wei Hao admitted defeat. For some reason, even though he felt that Wang Chang's actions were wrong, Wei Hao couldn't find any words to refute the other party's confidence. Thus, he was easily convinced. But you don't have to reject the bet. A duel should be fair. Since the Karak Spazinu merchants are rich, why are you being polite with them? Isn't it better to let them lose a few thousand gold taels? Wei Hao recalled the final matter and grumbled. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. This is called using a small trick to win a big one, throwing a brick to attract jade. Wang Chong patted Wei Hao's shoulders. He wasn't a fool, but he had a greater motive in mind. A few thousand gold taels wasn't enough to make him rich. Just Mosade's few thousand gold taels wasn't enough to make him rich. As long as he could build up the market for Wuzi's steel weapons, the fortune that Wang Chong would be able to earn wouldn't be something that a sword duel gamble could match up to. I'll be leaving now. I'll leave the matters here to you. Wei Hao, remember, if such a matter happens again in the future, just deal with it according to today's situation. After which, Wang Chong beckoned to the two Sindhi Buddhist monks who were drinking tea outside before leaving. Wang Chong didn't want too many people to know about the swordsmithing at the Blue Bottle Pavilion. As for Mosade, this Karak Spazinu sword merchant couldn't even speak the language of the Central Plains, so how could he possibly know what kind of person Wang Chong was? The moment Wang Chong left, the price on the door of the Blue Bottle Pavilion doubled, becoming 4,800 gold taels. At the same time, Mosade's Karak Spazinu sword was also hung on the door of the Blue Bottle Pavilion. This was the first time in the past 3 days that another sword was hung on the door of the Blue Bottle Pavilion. Furthermore, from the design of the weapon, it wasn't even a sword from the Central Plains, but an authentic Karak Spazinu sword. This novel change immediately attracted the attention of the crowd. When the contents of the sword duel gamble between Wang Chong and Mosade was exposed, the entire matter caused a commotion that even Wang Chong didn't expect. Number 1 sword in the world, the first direct confrontation between the Central Plains and Karak Spazinu and Abbasid Caliphate, the first sword duel of the Tang dynasty. All kinds of news of this kind spread all over the place. There were many Karak Spazinu and Abbasid Caliphate merchants in the Central Plains, but they were extremely conservative in their ways. This was the first time that a clash between Eastern and Western weapons occurred in the Tang dynasty. The entire matter immediately attracted a huge amount of attention. How can an unknown fellow represent the swords and sabers of the Tang dynasty? When the news spread to the major swordsmithing clans, the Qing clan was the first to be agitated. Even though the major swordsmithing clans were polite on the surface, they were all filled with indignation. They wanted to surpass the other swordsmithing clans and vie for the title of number 1 sword in the world. Just that, no one could have expected that a nameless fellow of unknown origin would take the lead. Initially, the major swordsmithing clans had a unified stand on the matter of the Blue Bottle Pavilion, and they didn't need to bother with such an insignificant matter. But now, everything was different. Chapter 53. Pass down my orders. Bring the best saber and sword in the clan to the Blue Bottle Pavilion as well. Let everyone witness what the best saber and sword is. Upon receiving the news, Elder Cheng Yuqing of the Cheng clan immediately issued an order. But Elder, that's 1,200 gold taels, the threshold for this duel was extremely high. A Cheng clan disciple tried to remind him, but before he could finish his words, he was interrupted. Do you think that we will lose? Cheng Yuqing glared at him in displeasure. I dare not. The Cheng clan disciple hurriedly lowered his head in fear. Regardless of the background of that nobody who is trying to gain the limelight, this is our chance in this wagered fight. To use 1,200 gold taels to suppress the other clans and vie for the title of the number 1 sword in the world, where else can we find such an opportunity? In comparison, what is 1,200 gold taels? Qing Yuqing said. Regardless of whether it was the Chen clan, Zhang clan, Lu clan, or Huang clan, none of them dared to hold this duel. Otherwise, they would become the common enemy of the others. However, when the Bluebottle Pavilion stepped forward, everything changed. This was a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity. In the past, the Qin clan would inform the other clans of any news. However, this time, the Qin clan didn't tell anyone. Instead, they secretly sent a sword to the Bluebottle Pavilion and hung it there. The same situation also happened. The Lu clan, Huang clan, and Li clan, which had several hundred years of heritage, secretly sent their swords to the Bluebottle Pavilion. Everyone was suspicious of the other party's little tricks, but this time, no one pointed it out. Hee, even our great Gungjin Sword Pavilion only sells a sword for 600 to 700 gold taels. What right does that lad have to sell it for 400 to 500 gold taels in the capital? Even we don't dare to do such a thing. If that lad didn't set up such a rule, we wouldn't have taken the initiative to pay him a visit. But now, you asked for it. It wasn't just the few great swordsmithing clans. In the capital, the various large sword shops and great sword workshops were filled with dissatisfaction. Wang Chang's ostentatious behavior didn't affect the major swordsmithing clans but the major swordsmithing shops and great sword workshops. Such an uninvited guest had already incurred the displeasure of the major swordsmithing clans. Go! Take out the treasure of our Gungjin Great Sword Building. Even if I can't obtain the title of #1 in the world, I'll make that guy bleed a little and teach him a lesson. In the capital, all of the great sword shops and great sword shops seemed to have come to an agreement. All of them took out their treasured swords and sabers and sent them to the Bluebottle Pavilion. For this kind of sword and saber gamble, if one party won, it would be more than 4,000. If 10 parties won, it would be more than 40,000. This was enough for anyone or any faction to bleed. Regardless of the intentions of the crowd, with so many sabers and swords from the Central Plains participating in the duel gamble, the influence of the duel gamble grew stronger and stronger. Go! Let the Han of the Central Plains witness the prowess of our Abbasid Caliphate and Karak Spazinu. Don't look down on us just because this is the territory of the Central Plains. A large number of sword and saber merchants from the western region also joined in. The whole thing was like a rolling snowball, getting bigger and bigger, and getting a little out of control. Even some swordsmithing clans, sword shops, and sword towers were attracted here. Humph! Do you really think that your swords and sabers are the #1 in the world? As the matter continued to fester, no one noticed an unprepossessing, full-bearded, brawny man standing among the crowd. Gazing at the swords and sabers on the pavilion, he sneered coldly. The Bluebottle Pavilion wasn't some deserted alley. On the contrary, it was located in the vicinity of the Tang dynasty's royal palace. There was a huge flow of people here, and those who came here were either wealthy merchants or martial arts experts. Such a huge matter had happened in the Bluebottle Pavilion, and it immediately attracted the attention of many people. The full-bearded man was one of them. 10 years of forging a sword without anyone bothering about me, and I'll shock the world in a single day. After I forge that sword, I'll show you all what it means to be the #1 in the world. The eyes of the full-bearded man were filled with indignation. After taking a deep glance at the swords and sabers on the pavilion, the full-bearded man retracted his gaze. Without alerting anyone, he passed through the crowd and left stealthily. After leaving the city, he walked out of the wide official road, along the undulating mountains, and through the shrubs that reached his shoulders, he finally arrived at the peak of a remote mountain. The peak of the mountain was barren, and from afar, one could smell the heavy scent of a furnace. As Zhang Xian walked closer, he could see broken swords strewn all over the mountain peak, scattered all over the place. At the center of these densely packed broken swords, a sword hut stood. Beside the sword hut, a huge metal furnace was still burning, and thick smoke billowed out from within. The full-bearded brawny man walked over, bent down, and used a pair of pliers to pick up a red-hot sword embryo from the metal furnace. After placing it on a metal plate, ding ding dang dang, he began striking it. This sword embryo was 4 fingers wide and 5 chi long. It was abnormally thick, and even though it wasn't completely forged, it gave off an exceptionally tough feeling. Copper, chromium, tin. I've spent 10 years honing the secret formula, and now, I'm finally going to forge the toughest and sharpest sword in the world. This time, I'll let all the swordsmithing clans in the world see what a true swordsmithing master is. Thoughts flashed through the full-bearded brawny man's mind as he swung his hammer even faster and more ferociously. Countless sparks burst forth from his hammer. In the remote mountain, no one knew that there was an unknown swordsmithing master here. As the descendant of a hidden swordsmithing master, the full-bearded brawny man possessed the bloodline of an ancient swordsmithing tribe, the Ruren. This was the first ancient tribe in the world to forge metal weapons. Even though this tribe had long been annihilated in the annals of history, the full-bearded brawny man had successfully passed down an ancient Ruren secret formula. The greatest wish of the full-bearded brawny man was to inherit the will of his ancestor. Not only did he want to forge the sharpest sword in the world, he also wanted to forge the toughest sword in the world. No expert would be able to break it, and he wanted to wash away the humiliation that his ancestor had once suffered. And this was his best chance. Ding ding dang dang. At the peak of the mountain, a raging gale blew and a blazing fire rose several dozen zhang into the air. The fire continued to burn from dusk till dawn, never stopping. Late in the morning, the flames at the peak of the mountain finally died down. The full-bearded brawny man held onto his newly forged broadsword and walked out of the sword hut in satisfaction, leaving the mountain. At the same time, there was an additional sword in the Bluebottle Pavilion. The commotion caused by the sword duel gamble in the Bluebottle Pavilion continued to grow. In just a single day, the number of swords participating in the duel gamble reached more than 20, and this was the result of a selection process. Even the high price of 1,200 gold taels wasn't able to stop them. The 4 great swordsmithing clans in the capital, the swordsmithing merchants in the western regions, the sword shops and smiths in the capital, as well as some unknown swordsmithing experts. Wei Hao was already overwhelmed with work. He had never expected that the commotion would develop to such an extent. Mosade's appearance was like a fuse that ignited the entire weapon market in the capital. A large number of swordsmithing clans, smiths, and even foreign powers joined in. The entire matter was like a broken dam, unable to be stopped. Like a rolling snowball, the attention of more and more people gradually gathered in front of the Bluebottle Pavilion. TSK. 4,800 gold taels, to think that it would become 4,800 gold taels. TSK. Count the number of swords on the pavilion, 20, 30. If he were to lose, he would probably lose all of his fortune and go bankrupt. Even if he were to go bankrupt, he would still be wearing his pants. That fellow has kicked a metal plate. The Zhang clan, Huang clan, Lu clan, and Huang clan, which one of them isn't a top-notch swordsmithing clan in the Tang dynasty? For this lad to challenge them to a sword duel gamble, isn't he just displaying his slight skill before an expert? What do you mean by overestimating the immensity of heaven and earth? This is what it means by overestimating the immensity of heaven and earth. The capital is filled with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. How can other places compare to it? If he wants to court death, what can you do? In front of the Bluebottle Pavilion, the crowd burst into laughter. Even though the battle for the #1 sword in the world was a huge commotion, it was something that only sword merchants were concerned about. To these people, they were more concerned about something else. This storm was caused by that fellow at the Bluebottle Pavilion. Everyone had been concerned about him all along. They weren't concerned about how formidable his swords were, but how badly that fellow would lose in the end. More than 30 top-notch swords were no joke. Just thinking about the identities of those people, they could really make one go bankrupt. Some of the more shameless ones even set up a gambling den in the vicinity of the Bluebottle Pavilion. The matter continued to grow, and gradually, it attracted the attention of another unique group. Hee, look at the Bluebottle Pavilion, it sure is bustling. There are so many people there. There must be at least a few thousand of them, right? The #1 sword in the world, this title sure is huge. Look at those swords, they aren't bad, just that they are a little expensive. Bullshit. If there's a good sword, what does money count for? I'm just afraid that it's just an ordinary sword. That's right. How can a sword that costs 600 to 700 gold taels be considered a good sword? It's fine to sell it to ordinary people, but it's really embarrassing to sell it to us, the Imperial Army. On the golden walls of the Tang Dynasty Royal Palace, a row of Imperial Army members stood on top of the walls, gazing at the distant Bluebottle Pavilion. Looking from the tall walls of the palace, the Bluebottle Pavilion seemed much smaller in comparison. However, the green-colored roof and the huge crowd in the surroundings were the most eye-catching sight within a few kilometers. The Bluebottle Pavilion was just a short distance away from the Tang Dynasty Royal Palace, and the commotion there had already attracted the attention of the Imperial Army. Life within the palace was extremely dull. Thus, when the duel gamble involving the swords of the Central Plains and the Western regions was announced, it immediately attracted the attention of the Imperial Army. Who is that? It seems to be Li Jun too. Just as they were chatting merrily, someone suddenly spoke. Everyone followed the gaze of that colleague and saw a few familiar figures walking toward the Bluebottle Pavilion. Shoo! It's Lord Zhao. Shut up, don't speak anymore. The expressions of the Imperial Army changed slightly, and none of them spoke a word. The distance of several hundred zhang was covered in an instant, and before the eyes of the Imperial Army members, the three figures walked into the Bluebottle Pavilion. We're from the Imperial Army. The three of them took out their identity tokens and revealed their identities. What? Wei Hao was busy tidying up the information of the guests who were participating in the duel gamble. Upon hearing those words, his eyes widened and he abruptly stood up. His entire being calmed down. Without waiting for the trio to continue speaking, Wei Hao sucked in a deep breath and stared at the trio seriously. He waved his hand, walked around the table, and hastily strode forward. The three Imperial guards were baffled by his actions. Chapter 54. Wang Chong, the Imperial Army that you spoke of is really here. This was the first thing that Wei Hao said as he rushed into the Wang family residence. Back then, when he was selling his sword, Wang Chong had mentioned to him that if the Imperial Army were to buy his sword, he should remind him. He didn't expect that the Imperial Army would really come. At the top floor of the Bluebottle Pavilion, Wang Chong saw the Imperial Army that Wei Hao spoke of. Ever since he was born, this was the first time that Wang Chong had seen the Imperial Army. The Imperial Army guarded the capital and protected the emperor. They were the royalty of the world, and they were born with the imprint of the royal family. Most people rarely came into contact with them. This was also the first time that Wang Chong had come into contact with the Imperial Army of the royal family. This was also the reason why Wei Hao was so surprised. What a strong scent of authority. It's no wonder that many scions in the capital don't dare to offend the Imperial Army. Wang Chong said to himself as he looked at these people. As they guarded the emperor and the royal family, they came into contact with many officials in the royal palace. Thus, the Imperial Army carried a strong scent of authority on them. Compared to ordinary soldiers, it was like comparing an official to a servant. Even without a token, it was easy to differentiate them. These people were like tigers and tigers, but they were also taciturn. Before them, it was easy for ordinary people to feel fearful, restrained, and uncomfortable. In terms of disposition, it was indeed impossible for an ordinary person to stand against them. The emperor's guards are indeed formidable. As expected of the strongest and most elite army in the world. Wang Chong complimented them. Wang Chong had seen the Imperial Army in his previous life. Compared to his previous life, the imperial army still retained the image of a mighty and valiant army in Wang Chang's mind. The imperial army was fond of martial arts. Thus, their prestige far exceeded that of ordinary people. However, a few years later, with the decline of the Tang dynasty and the emphasis on culture and the suppression of martial power, a large number of noblemen and playboys were squeezed into the imperial army and occupied high positions, while those with talent were pushed out of the imperial army. As a result, the imperial army, which was the most valiant in his previous life, became a weak army. When they were needed to protect the capital and the world, the imperial army collapsed on the battlefield with thousands of casualties, which became the heaviest shame of the Tang dynasty and the pain in the hearts of Wang Chong and everyone in the world at that time. Such a tragedy once is enough. No matter what, I will not allow such a thing to happen in the imperial army again. Wang Chong felt a lump in his throat. When the tragedy happened in his previous life, he was in the capital and saw with his own eyes the corpses of the imperial army piled up on top of each other, piling up in all the alleys from outside the city to the palace, forming a magnificent sight. Blood flowed like a river in the alleyway, giving Wang Chong a shock he had never felt before, as well as sorrow. It was at that time that Wang Chong lost his family for the first time, his aunt and uncle. SSS. Taking in a deep breath, Wang Chong quickly calmed himself down. Regardless of how the imperial army was in his memory, that was something that happened in his previous life. In this life, the fate of the Wang clan had been changed by him. What happened in his previous life might not necessarily happen in this one. Wang Chong calmed himself down and slowly swept his gaze across the three of them. When his gaze fell on the man who had a lightning-shaped scar on his glabella, his heart suddenly jolted. It's him. Wang Chong suddenly recognized the person. Zhao Fengchen. Wang Chong didn't expect the person to be him, one of the three legendary experts of the imperial army. In his previous life, he was once the marshal of the imperial army. His most distinctive trait was the lightning-shaped scar on his glabella. In his previous life, everyone said that Zhao Fengchen carried two sabers with him, one by his waist and the other by his glabella. It was through this that Wang Chong recognized him. Compared to the Zhao Fengchen in Wang Chang's memory, the Zhao Fengchen before him was clearly much younger. There was an air of inexperience about him, and he was far from the valiant aura he exuded in his previous life. But even so, this Zhao Fengchen had already displayed many outstanding traits. Of the three, his aura and might were clearly a notch higher. If he didn't remember wrongly, this Zhao Fengchen was probably a marshal of the imperial army, a top-notch figure in the imperial army. In the future, his achievements would be even greater. His future was truly bright. The position of the supreme commander of the imperial army was still waiting for him. To think that it would be him. Wang Chang's heart pounded furiously. This wasn't the reason why he remembered him. To Wang Chong, he had another more illustrious identity. The most famous Wuxi steel weapon collector in the Central Plains. In his previous life, all of the legends regarding the Wuxi steel were related to him. Zhao Fengchen was a typical, martial arts fanatic. He was extremely interested in top-notch weapons, especially Wuxi steel weapons. Of the most expensive Wuxi steel weapons in his previous life, nearly a third of them came from his hands. Zhao Fengchen's interest in the toughness, sharpness, and unique patterns of Wuxi steel had reached a level of fanaticism. In his previous life, when the reputation of Wuxi steel weapons rose to fame in the Central Plains, Zhao Fengchen was the one who started it. Furthermore, the incomparably sharp Wuxi steel weapons, coupled with his outstanding cultivation, created the legend of him being the strongest in the imperial army. It's really like fishing and catching a big whale. The 108,000 pores on Wang Chang's body opened up, and he suddenly felt incomparably comfortable. This was fate. Initially, Wang Chang's intention of selling the Wuxi steel weapons was just to lure a few wealthy imperial army members. To think that he would end up with the prehistoric shark, Zhao Fengchen. Zhao Fengchen's love for the Wuzi steel was publicly acknowledged to be ingrained into his bones. If the Wuzi steel was a kind of poison, then Zhao Fengchen would definitely be deeply poisoned, and there was no cure for it. The sudden appearance of such a famous figure in Wang Cheng's plans gave Wang Cheng a huge confidence boost. "You're the owner of that sword?" Zhao Fengchen asked. This youngster gave him a weird feeling. If others knew that he was an Imperial Army member, they would be fearful of him. However, this youngster stared at him in a daze, seemingly thinking of something. "I am." Coming back to his senses, Wang Cheng faintly smiled, his expression unrestrained. Zhao Fengchen didn't reveal his name to Wei Hao. Clearly, he didn't want others to know of his identity. Since Wang Cheng knew of his identity, he wouldn't let him off so easily. "I wish to buy the sword hanging on your door. May I know if you can remove the black cloth for me to take a look? If I'm satisfied, I'm willing to pay a price that will satisfy you. Even higher than your current offer." Zhao Fengchen went straight to the point and stated his purpose for coming here. His actions were exceptionally straightforward. "How much can you offer?" Wang Cheng didn't back down. "No less than 8,000 gold taels." Zhao Fengchen made a gesture that blinded Wei Hao. My goodness, what kind of person is this? The offer on the door was only 4,800 gold taels, and this fellow actually offered 8,000. Are all the Imperial Army members in the royal palace that wealthy? Wei Hao's lower jaw nearly fell to the ground. My monthly expenses are only 10 gold taels. Based on his spending rate, he probably won't be able to finish spending it his entire life. What is extravagant? This is extravagant. How extravagant? Hurry up and agree to it. Wei Hao couldn't help but urge. Only a fool would reject 8,000 gold taels. If a weapon could be sold for 8,000 gold taels, then the 90,000 gold taels that Wang Cheng owed the two Buddhist monks wouldn't be a problem at all. This time, he was rich. No. Wang Cheng stared at Zhao Fengchen calmly. The two words that he spat out shattered Wei Hao's dream. Why? Wei Hao and Zhao Fengchen blurted out at the same time. Wang Cheng, you're insane. Why would you reject such a good offer? Wei Hao was on the verge of going insane from anxiety. That was 8,000 gold taels. If he were to sell it, after paying off the debt of 1,700 gold taels to Su Bai and the others, as well as the possible penalty for the contract with the Hyderabad ore, Wang Cheng would still have quite a bit of money left. Given their expenditure, it was sufficient for them to lead a befuddled life for several decades. That was more than 1,000 gold taels. To think that Wang Cheng would reject such an offer. Wei Hao felt that he couldn't keep up with his train of thought. This Gongzi, my offer shouldn't be low, right? Zhao Fengchen felt differently from Wei Hao. He had to admit that this youngster had left him shocked. 8,000 gold taels, most people wouldn't be able to resist the temptation. Yet, this youngster before him rejected it without even thinking about it. This left Zhao Fengchen astonished, and at the same time, he couldn't understand the reason behind it. General has just arrived here, so you might not know the rules of my sword sale. You are not allowed to look, touch, and of course, you are not allowed to remove the black cloth covering the sword. Do you understand my words? Wang Cheng said calmly. Wang Cheng wasn't surprised by Zhao Fengchen's wealth at all. Possessing the memories of his previous life, Wang Cheng couldn't be clearer about Zhao Fengchen's background. The person before him had an illustrious background, the wealthiest man in the capital, as well as the young master of the prestigious Zhao clan. Zhao Fengchen had a secret that few knew of. Zhao Fengchen had a sliver of the royal bloodline. In his great-grandfather's generation, there was once a princess of the royal family who descended into the Zhao clan, and she was Zhao Fengchen's great-grandmother. It was this sliver of royal bloodline that created Zhao Fengchen's unique standing, causing him to be highly regarded in the clan. The Zhao clan supported him relentlessly. No matter what Zhao Fengchen needed, they would grant it to him. The reason why Zhao Fengchen was able to achieve so much in his later life, becoming the Grand Marshal of the Imperial Army at such a young age, was closely related to the support of the clan. The Zhao clan had always hidden this secret, and it was only many years later that it was revealed. The Zhao clan was said to be the wealthiest clan in the capital, and they were said to be the wealthiest clan in the capital. Regardless of whether it was to Zhao Fengchen or the Zhao clan, 8,000 gold taels meant nothing. Now was indeed the best time to do so. However, this wasn't what Wang Chong wanted. No one knew better than Wang Chong how popular the Wuzi steel weapons would become in the future. 8,000 gold taels might be a huge sum to an ordinary person, but to the true value of the Wuzi steel weapons in the future, it was equivalent to making a losing deal. How could Wang Chong possibly be tempted by it? Rules can be changed. 8,000 gold taels should be enough to compensate Gongzi's loss, right? It's just a glance, Gongzi doesn't mind. Zhao Fengchen persuaded in an attempt to change Wang Chong's mind. I just want to ask a question. If you aren't satisfied after taking a look, will you pay 8,000 gold taels as well? Surprised, Wang Chong pointed out the crux of the matter. Zhao Fengchen was stumped for words. The reason why he offered 8,000 gold taels was to buy a good sword. If he were to pay such a price for a piece of scrap metal, he would be a fool. Chapter 55. It seems like General isn't interested in buying a sword. The General only wants a sword worth 8,000 taels of silver, not my sword. Wang Chong shook his head. Does Gongzi think that your sword isn't worth 8,000 gold taels? Zhao Fengchen smiled. Wang Chong shook his head with a smile, not bothering to argue with him. My words are still the same. You aren't allowed to look or touch it. If you wish to buy it, you can take it away for 4,800 gold taels. By tomorrow, it won't be this price anymore. After saying those words, Wang Chong flung his sleeves and turned around to leave. Without any hesitation, he stepped out of the door in the blink of an eye, leaving no room for negotiation. Lord, what do we do? That lad isn't buying it at all. After Wang Chong left, a tall and thin Imperial Army commander beside Zhao Fengchen finally couldn't help but grumble. Let me think about it. Frowning, Zhao Fengchen fell into deep contemplation. 8,000 gold taels. This was more than 10 times higher than Wang Chong's initial offer. However, Wang Chong rejected it without any hesitation. His decisiveness far exceeded his expectations. This was something that Zhao Fengchen didn't expect. Lord, why are you wasting your breath on him? If that lad doesn't agree to it, we'll just forcefully take down the sword from the Blue Bottle Pavilion. The tall and thin Imperial Army commander suggested. He was extremely dissatisfied with Wang Chong's attitude. They were Imperial Army commanders. Wasn't this lad being too arrogant? No. This Blue Bottle Pavilion is the property of the Duke of Wei. Others might not know of it, but do you think that you don't? After so many days, when have you seen anyone stealing swords? With a stern expression, Zhao Fengchen rejected it without any hesitation. Furthermore, do you still want the face of the Imperial Army? If such a thing were to happen, how are we going to face ourselves in the future? But Lord Huang, the tall and thin Imperial Army commander, wanted to say something, but the moment the words left his mouth, he realized that he had said something wrong. He hurriedly stopped himself, but it was already too late. Turning around, he saw that Zhao Fengchen's complexion had turned incomparably awful. You don't have to worry about Lord Huang. I'll handle it myself. Hearing the words Lord Huang, Zhao Fengchen clearly felt a little irritated. His interest seemed to have diminished by quite a bit, and it wasn't as intense as before. I'll leave this sword to you. When they come back, help me hang it on the gate. Since I can't buy the sword, I might as well join this gamble. Zhao Fengchen removed an ancient-looking silver sword from his waist and tossed it over. After which, he walked through the door and left with widened strides. At the same time, outside the Bluebottle Pavilion, Wang Chong and Wei Hao were walking side by side. This bastard. I thought he was a straightforward person, but it turns out he's the same as everyone else. The moment he walked out of the Bluebottle Pavilion, Wei Hao cursed non-stop. If not for Wang Chong's explanation, he wouldn't have known that Zhao Fengqian's 8,000 gold taels had such a purpose. Don't blame him. If he didn't even distinguish between good and bad swords, he would have bought them. That's the real problem. Wang Chong waved his hands casually. In his previous life, Zhao Fengqian was a spendthrift. He was the one who picked up a few 100,000 Wuzi steel weapons. Many people might have thought that he was a fool due to his wealth. However, the truth was the exact opposite. After interacting with Zhao Fengqian this time, Wang Chong could sense it. Even though Zhao Fengqian was a spendthrift person, what he bought was what he thought was the most valuable. Towards those worthless items, Zhao Fengqian wasn't any more generous than others. In fact, if one were to think about it, how could a future marshal of the Imperial Army be a fool? However, aren't you walking a little too quickly? That's 8,000 gold taels we're talking about. To be able to afford such a price, these people are the real buyers. Wei Hao caught up to Wang Chong's footsteps and said indignantly. Thinking about how it was a pity to let go of such a rich man just like that. Don't worry, he won't be able to escape. It's only a matter of time before he comes back. Wang Chong faintly smiled. The relationship between Zhao Fengqian and the Wuzi steel was fated, and it couldn't be severed. Wang Chong believed that in the future, when the black cloth covering the sword is removed and the Wuzi steel weapons are unveiled, Zhao Fengqian would definitely feel the calling. Zhao Fengqian. Zhao Fengqian, Wang Chong muttered to himself. Suddenly, a thought flashed across Wang Chong's mind. In his previous life, Zhao Fengqian was a legend. Regardless of whether it was the story between him and the Wuzi steel, his astounding cultivation, or his deathmatch with the foreign invaders, he left a deep impression on everyone in the world. However, compared to the illustrious position he would have in his future life, the current Zhao Fengqian was still inconspicuous. From his actions, it was clear that he was a high-ranking officer in the Imperial Army. However, there were at least 1,000 high-ranking officers like him in the Imperial Army. Based on the memories of his previous life, Zhao Fengqian would remain in his current position for at least 6 to 7 years. And the reason for this situation was related to a nemesis of Zhao Fengqian's. Huang Xiaotian. A name flashed across Wang Chong's mind. For Zhao Fengqian to become one of the 3 publicly acknowledged legends in the history of the Imperial Army, his talent and strength were unimaginable. However, it was inconceivable that such an outstanding person could only become the Grand Marshal at the age of 40. In his entire life, he was truly a late bloomer. The reason why such a situation occurred was closely related to another Imperial Army general who was equally powerful and talented. That person's name was Huang Xiaotian. Even though his achievements couldn't match up to Zhao Fengqian's, Huang Xiaotian wasn't too far off from Zhao Fengqian. In the Imperial Army, other than the Grand Marshal, he was definitely one of the strongest commanders. As the saying goes, a mountain can't hold 2 tigers. 2 people with similar interests could become friends, but 2 people with similar personalities could only become nemesis. Zhao Fengqian and Huang Xiaotian were destined to never be friends for the rest of their lives. It was this Huang Xiaotian who forcefully suppressed Zhao Fengqian's position as the commander of the Imperial Army for 6 to 7 years. It was only after Zhao Fengqian displayed his prowess that Huang Xiaotian was left behind, that Zhao Fengqian rose to the top and became a legend in the future. Tracing back to the source of the feud between the 2 of them, it came from an extremely important selection for the commander of the Imperial Army. Back then, both Huang Xiaotian and Zhao Fengqian were popular contenders. However, in the duel, Zhao Fengqian lost to Huang Xiaotian and lost this important opportunity. From then on, Huang Xiaotian made use of his status as the superior to force Zhao Fengqian into that position, rendering him unable to move. And in terms of time, the imperial army selection should have happened at this very moment. Wang. This thought flashed across Wang Cheng's mind, and for a moment, he was stunned. Suddenly, Wang Cheng understood why Zhao Fengchen would look for him. Wang Cheng, what's wrong? A voice sounded by his ear. Wei Hao stared at Wang Cheng in astonishment, unable to understand why the latter wasn't leaving. Ah! It's nothing. Wang Cheng suddenly recovered from his daze. Shaking his head, he pulled open the carriage door and dived into a carriage by the roadside with Wei Hao. On the carriage, with a flick of the whip, the carriage galloped off into the distance. Gongzi, wait a moment. Just as they were speaking, flurried footsteps sounded behind them. Wang Cheng and Wei Hao turned around, only to see an imperial army member rushing over from the Bluebottle Pavilion. Speaking of the devil, Wei Hao turned to look at Wang Cheng with his mouth agape, as though he had seen a ghost. They were just talking about this matter a moment ago, and these fellows came so quickly. Did they change their minds so quickly? Wang Cheng was way too incredible. However, contrary to their expectations, the imperial army member brought up another matter. Gongzi, may I ask what the metal mountain in front of the Bluebottle Pavilion is for? Is it for sale as well? As the imperial army member spoke, he pointed to the metal mountain in front of the Bluebottle Pavilion. The Bluebottle Pavilion was only a short distance away from the royal palace. The matter that had happened here had already spread through the imperial army. Speaking of swords, there was no one who loved swords more than the imperial army. The sword duel gamble in the Bluebottle Pavilion had already attracted the attention of a large group of imperial army members. Otherwise, they wouldn't have appeared here in the first place. It was one thing for everyone to know about the swords on the pavilion. However, no one knew what the massive metal lump, or rather, the metal mountain, was for. In the royal palace, the various imperial army members were speculating on the matter, and there were even people who placed their bets on the matter. It was truly a bustling scene. This imperial army member was also perplexed by the matter. Upon meeting Wang Cheng, he hurried over to ask about it. He. Understanding what was going on, Wang Cheng couldn't help but smile. Make a guess. Leaving behind these words, the carriage left the Bluebottle Pavilion. After returning from the Bluebottle Pavilion, Wang Cheng quickly immersed himself in his martial arts practice. Judging by the time, the 3 great training camps should have already started their preparations. The requirements to enter the 3 great training camps were extremely high right from the start, and it would only get higher and higher in the future. Without sufficient martial arts, it would be difficult for one to enter. Other than this, Wang Cheng also had to consider grandfather's birthday. In the entire Wang clan, the true backbone of the clan had never been his father Wang Yan, big uncle Wang Zhen, aunt, uncle, and the others. From the start to the end, there had only been a single backbone of the Wang clan, and that was his grandfather. As a clan of generals and ministers in the capital, the Wang clan possessed a huge amount of resources. However, these resources were usually indiscernible. In terms of wealth, the Wang clan couldn't match up to the Zhang clan, and in terms of influence, they couldn't match up to the Yao clan. Even Yao Feng had access to more resources than him. However, the Wang clan was a true top-notch clan in the Tang dynasty. The reason why there was such an incongruous situation was because the descendants of the Wang clan had to earn grandfather's approval in order to receive resources. This was the case for his big uncle Wang Zhen to enter the royal court, his father Wang Yan to enter the military, and even his big aunt and little uncle were the same as well. Thus, when grandfather passed away in his previous life and big uncle chose the wrong side, the Wang clan fell so quickly. The Wang clan doesn't tolerate mediocre people, this was grandfather's philosophy. Thus, without displaying sufficient capability and receiving grandfather's approval, the descendants of the Wang clan were no different from ordinary clans. If Wang Cheng wanted to receive resources from the clan to change his fate, he would have to obtain grandfather's approval. Furthermore, The Four Quarters Embassy was built by the emperor for grandfather and the others, and it was a place where they could discuss political affairs. It was heavily guarded and guarded by the imperial army. Even the descendants of the Wang clan only had a single chance to enter the Four Quarters Embassy every year. It was during grandfather's birthday. This was also Wang Chang's only chance in a year. Chapter 56. While Wang Chong was holed up in the Wang clan residence, another person in the capital was not idling around. How is it? Did you find anything? In the Duke of Su's mansion, Su Bai reclined on a rattan chair made of golden threads, fiddling with a green thumb ring between his fingers, twirling it around. Behind him, two delicate and pretty girls were fanning themselves non-stop. During his stay in the Duke Su residence, Su Bai had not been idle for even a moment. Wang Chang's affairs were constantly turning over in his mind. The Yao clan had allied with King Qi, and old Master Yao's methods were unfathomable. If the Su clan wanted to hitch a ride on the Yao clan and King Qi's boat, they had to hurry. As for Wang Chong, it was Su Bai's gift to Yao Feng, as well as the Su clan's gift to the Yao clan. As long as this matter was done well, his relationship with Yao Feng would grow even closer. As the future successor of the Su clan, as long as he could maintain a good relationship with Yao Feng, the relationship between the Su clan and the Yao clan wouldn't deteriorate. As for the Yao clan's recent setback, Su Bai didn't pay much attention to it, nor did he know what was going on. To Su Bai and the Su clan, as long as the Yao clan's old master Yao was still standing, this matter wasn't a big deal. Reporting to Gongzi, we have been keeping an eye on the Wang clan, but after that lad Wang Chong obtained the gold, he has been living in seclusion. It's hard for us to get any concrete news about him. Just as he was deep in thought, a voice sounded. In front of Su Bai, a tall and skinny scout in his 20s bowed respectfully and reported his findings. Living in seclusion. Su Bai recovered from his daze and frowned. This wasn't in line with his expectations. After borrowing so much money, shouldn't a profligate scion like Wang Chong go out to indulge in debauchery and extravagance? Living in seclusion wasn't in line with his style. Yes. We've observed him, and in the past month, he has only gone out 7 to 8 times. Furthermore, there were a few times where he went out because there were too many people in the city. The other times, he went to look for Wei Hao. The tall scout said. There were many spies like him in the Su family. The tall and thin man was just one of them. Up until now, the group of people hadn't realized that Wang Chong had deliberately gone around in circles to shake them off. They thought that he had accidentally passed through the downtown area and lost his target because there were too many people. However, we noticed that Wei Hao was making quite a few moves. There's a sword seller in the Blue Bottle Pavilion controlled by the Duke of Wei residence, and he set up a sword duel gamble, causing a huge commotion. Before the lanky spy could finish, Su Bai interrupted him impatiently. I don't care about Wei Hao, and I'm not interested in swords or sabers. In the future, you don't have to report such trivial matters to me. Just keep an eye on Wang Chong. I don't believe that he won't spend 1,000 taels of gold. Yes. The tall and skinny spy quickly stopped talking. Also, it's about a month's time. Help me contact the Gongzi of the other clans. 3 days later, no, 7 days later, I'll have them bring the debt and we'll head to the Wang clan to demand for the money. I want to make them suffer a huge loss before the Wang clan old master's 70th birthday. Lying on the rattan chair, Su Bai sneered coldly. Yes, Gongzi. The tall and skinny spy left to carry out his orders. The sword duel gamble at the Blue Bottle Pavilion was still going on. 9,600 taels. This was the 5th day's price from the Blue Bottle Pavilion. Initially, Zhao Fengchen was still hesitant and had the intention to buy it. However, upon seeing the latest price, that thought disappeared from his mind. He didn't even buy it at 4,800 taels. Now that the price had doubled, all the more he wouldn't buy it. Otherwise, wouldn't he be a fool? Even so, the legend of the Bluebottle Pavilion continued. On the sixth day, 19,200 taels. This was a sky-high price that was unprecedented in history. When Wei Hao listed this price, even he shuddered in shock. On the first day, when Wang Chong listed the price at 600 taels, he didn't think much of it. Even when the price doubled, Wei Hao didn't realize the true meaning behind his actions. This was the first time that the price of a sword in the Central Plains had exceeded 10,000 taels. Under the circumstances where top-notch swords were only priced at 600 gold taels or at most 1,000 gold taels, this was a price that one could only look up to. How can this be? Wei Hao looked at the price that he had listed, and as though hungover, he suddenly woke up from his stupor. Only then did he realize what he had been doing for the past few days. Even those from the four great swordsmithing clans were stunned. Everything that Wang Chong had done had happened right before their eyes. In fact, on the first day, they had even sent men to wreak havoc on the Bluebottle Pavilion. After which, when Wang Chong doubled the price, they knew what was going on. However, no one truly understood what Wang Chong was doing. Until the words on the signboard of the Bluebottle Pavilion turned into an astonishing 5 digits. Wang Gongzi, if you wish to go back on your words, it's still not too late. No one knew that when Wei Hao hung up the signboard, the Zhang clans Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian had secretly arrived at the Wang clan's residence. The two of them had a grim expression on their faces. You all know about it. Wang Chong received the two of them in his backyard. While practicing his fist technique, he chuckled to the two of them. Compared to a few days ago, Wang Chong's aura had grown significantly stronger. This was the work of the dragon bone art. Wang Gongzi, do you know what you are doing? This isn't a joke. The duo's expression didn't ease up in the slightest. They didn't think that Wang Chong's joke was funny at all. 19200 gold taels for 30 people. If you were to lose, you would have to pay a total of 57,000 gold taels. I don't think that the Wang clan can afford such a sum. The duo's expression was grim, and it could even be said that they were worried. Wang Chong was too young. Youths tend to be hot-blooded, and hot-blooded people tend to commit mistakes. The sword duel gamble at the Bluebottle Pavilion wasn't a small matter that could be messed around. It could be said that the slightest mistake could lead to an unprecedented crisis for the Wang clan. Duke Zhou's illustrious reputation would be ruined here. Upon hearing those words, Wang Chong chuckled. On the first day, 600 gold taels, on the second day, 1,200 gold taels, on the third day, 2,400 gold taels. On the sixth day, it became 19,200 gold taels. Wang Chong's thoughts were clearly revealed in these 6 days. In the other world, this was a classic hunger marketing tactic. However, in this world, it was still a novel concept. No one had tried it before. Even Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian didn't realize that they had subconsciously accepted this method. The moment the two of them came to him, they didn't question whether it was reasonable to sell a sword for 10,000 gold taels or whether it was appropriate to do so. Instead, they questioned whether he would be able to pay back the bet if he sold it at such a high price. This was a kind of subtle influence. If Wang Chong had priced the Wuzi steel sword at 19,200 gold taels from the start, it would have been impossible for him to achieve such an effect. Elders, do you think that I will lose? Wang Chong's fists rumbled. While practicing his punches, he spoke to the two of them without turning his head. Wang Chong, don't you understand the severity of this matter? The merchants from Karak Spazinu, Abbasid Caliphate, Silla, and Goguryeo are all from the major swordsmithing clans. On top of that, there are also various sword shops and weapon shops. In fact, I heard that there are even military commanders involved. This isn't a game you kids are playing. You can get away with it if you want to. If you don't handle this matter well, you will bring a calamity upon the Wang clan. Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian shook their heads. This wasn't a problem of whether Wang Chong would lose or not. Rather, it was impossible for Wang Chong to win. The Wang clan had never been a swordsmithing clan, and they didn't have any master swordsmiths either. In this matter, it was impossible for Wang Chong to win against those swordsmithing clans and weapon merchants of the western regions. Wang Chong was courting trouble for himself, and trouble for the Wang clan. Elders, you don't have to worry about the duel. Isn't tomorrow the last day? If there's a need, I'll look for you then. Wang Chong smiled calmly. There wasn't the slightest change in his expression. The reason why Wang Chong took over the Hyderabad ores wasn't because of his courage but because of his own confidence. Swordsmithing was an art. Not only did it emphasize on the materials used, it also emphasized on the craftsmanship. In these two aspects, there was no one in this era who could surpass him. Wuzi steel didn't just use the Hyderabad ores and the Hyderabad technique, it was also fused with the swordsmithing technique he had learned from another spacetime continuum. The grooves on the swords could enhance the might of Wuzi's steel weapons to the greatest extent. In this era, Wuzi's steel weapons represented the highest tier of swords. While there was no sword that could match it, there was definitely no sword that could surpass it. At the very least, it was impossible for such swords to originate from Karak Spazinu, Abbasid Caliphate, Goguryeo, Nanzhao, and the four great swordsmithing clans in the capital. Wang Chong had this confidence, which was why he dared to accept the duel. However, it wasn't convenient for Wang Chong to tell Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian about this. Sigh, Wang Gongzi, no matter when you have thought it through, you can look for us before noon tomorrow. As long as you hand over the contract for the Hyderabad ores to us, we will try our best to minimize your losses. Even though our Zhang clan's swords and sabers might not be the best in the world, there aren't many who can defeat us. This way, we can more or less be of help to you. The two of them sighed deeply. Their hearts were filled with worry. Wang Chong was still too young, and it was easy for him to be impetuous. When impetuous, it was easy for him to act rashly and disregard the consequences. The sword duel gamble at the Bluebottle Pavilion was the best proof. However, it was a pity that it was impossible for Wang Chong to listen to their advice. Let's hope that this matter doesn't implicate too many people. A child who doesn't know the immensity of the heavens and earth, I can only hope that the Wang clan doesn't suffer too much of a blow. Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian heaved a long sigh before bidding their farewells and leaving this Zhang clan might be a good partner to work with in the future. After Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian left, Wang Chong stood in the garden and muttered to himself, deep in thought. The Zhang clan didn't wait for the dust to settle to strike him while he was down and snatch the contract. Instead, they sought him out in advance, hoping to minimize his losses. From this point, it could be seen that the two of them had left a good impression on Wang Chong. If he were to carry out his plans in the future, the Zhang clan might be a suitable candidate. With such thoughts in mind, Wang Chong left the garden. The sun rose and the moon set. In the blink of an eye, it was already the 7th day. It's finally time to decide the victor. Chapter 57. The sun shone brightly in the clear sky. On this day, Wang Chong washed up early and changed into a clean green cotton robe. This way, he would appear to be older than his actual age. After doing all these, Wang Chong left the house, boarded the carriage, and headed towards the Bluebottle Pavilion in high spirits. Outside the Bluebottle Pavilion, there was a huge crowd. This was the last day of the sword duel gamble, and it had attracted countless spectators. Outside the Bluebottle Pavilion, Wang Chong saw Wei Hao, who had been waiting for him for a long time. Wei Hao had 2 guards from the Wei clan by his side. His face was pale, and he paced back and forth non-stop. Beads of cold sweat formed on his forehead, and he looked anxious and uneasy. Great! Wang Chong, you're finally here. The moment Wang Chang's carriage arrived, Wei Hao felt as though a huge burden had been lifted off his shoulders. As though he had found his pillar of support, he hurried forward with his 2 guards. His complexion was much rosier. "Xiaonian, it's been hard on you." Wang Chong stepped out of the carriage and called out Wei Hao's nickname. Hearing such an intimate form of address, Wei Hao's heart warmed, and his expression relaxed slightly. But soon, Wei Hao's brows furrowed once more, and he felt uneasy. "Wang Chong, have you really thought through this matter? More than 30 swords and sabers were no joke. It's not too late to regret it now." Wei Hao's voice trembled nervously as he spoke. Honestly speaking, Wei Hao didn't expect the matter of helping Wang Chong sell the Wuzi steel swords to develop to such a state. Wei Hao couldn't even sleep well when he saw the 30 or so treasured swords and sabers from the various factions hanging on the gate. Wei Hao had been keeping this matter from his family. His father was currently busy with an important matter in the royal court, and he didn't have the time to care about anything else. If he were to discover the truth, he would probably be beaten half to death. At times, Wei Hao truly admired Wang Chong from the bottom of his heart. As for the Wuzi steel weapons, he had only been assisting from the side, but he already felt very uneasy. However, Wang Chong was carrying a debt of 90,000 gold taels from Sinlu and 1,700 gold taels from the 8 Gods Pavilion. If things were to go wrong here, he might have to pay even more, possibly several 100,000 gold taels. There was no clan in the capital that could easily shoulder such a massive debt. If it were an ordinary person, they would have long been terrified, pale with anxiety, and sleepless nights. However, Wang Chong acted as if nothing had happened. He even had the mood to comfort himself. Wei Hao knew that if it were him, he definitely wouldn't be able to do it. "Don't worry, Nian. You've known me for so long. Do I look like the kind of person who would seek death and make trouble for himself?" Wang Chong chuckled. As he spoke, he patted Wei Hao's shoulders. Wei Hao said solemnly. He had grown up with Wang Chong, so he didn't think that Wang Chong was that kind of person. In fact, if Wang Chong was that kind of person, he wouldn't have been able to guide him to defeat Gao Fei at the 8 Gods Pavilion. But, Wei Hao still wanted to say something. "There's no buts. I have my own arrangements for this matter. Later on, you just have to follow my instructions," Wang Chong said calmly. His voice was filled with confidence. After a moment of silence, Wei Hao nodded his head seriously. The eaves of the Bluebottle Pavilion were extremely high. Wang Chong took a glance and saw a huge crowd moving about. Everyone who had participated in the sword duel gamble had arrived here much earlier than Wang Chong. Even though it was noisy outside the Bluebottle Pavilion, the interior of the Bluebottle Pavilion was completely silent. No one spoke to one another, and there was an air of competition between them. "Ha, the number 1 sword in the world." Wang Chong smiled and shook his head. Retracting his gaze, he walked into the Bluebottle Pavilion with Wei Hao. "Wang Chong, is the price going to rise today?" Wei Hao asked anxiously as they walked up the wooden stairs. "There's no need for that." Wang Chong shook his head. It wasn't that he was afraid of losing too much in the duel gamble. Rather, there was no longer a need for it. Even though the price of Wuzi steel would rise to more than 100,000 gold taels in the future, given the current market, 19,200 gold taels was already the limit. There was a process of acceptance for everything. If the price were to rise too much, it would be too late. Walking up the antique wooden steps, Wang Chong and Wei Hao soon arrived at the 3rd floor. The hall on the 3rd floor was filled with people. The people from the 4 great swordsmithing clans, the swordsmithing shops in the capital, the swordsmithing clans from the western regions, the imperial army. They were all gathered here. From the looks of it, they had arrived a long time ago. "Wei Gongzi, it's about time for the duel. Where's the owner of the sword? It's about time to call him out, right?" The moment Wei Hao stepped onto the 3rd floor, he immediately attracted everyone's attention. As for Wang Chong, he was completely ignored. Everyone, isn't the owner of the sword here? Wei Hao smiled and stepped to the side, giving way to Wang Chong behind him. It's a stab if I stretch my head out, but it's also a stab if I shrink my head back. After worrying for so long, Wei Hao had already thought things through. The duel gamble had already been decided, and it was too late to regret it now. Since that was the case, he might as well be more open about it. Wang. The moment Wei Hao said those words, countless gazes instantly gathered on Wang Chong. In that instant, there was a moment of silence in the crowded Blue Bottle Pavilion. Everyone stared at Wang Chong with shock, astonishment, disbelief, and doubt. That is the owner of the sword. The elder of the Chen clan, Qing Yuqing, stepped forward and stared at Wang Chong with a look of disbelief. When Wei Hao and Wang Chong were at the bottom of the pavilion, many people had seen them, but no one thought much of it. In their view, to be able to cause such a huge ruckus in the Blue Bottle Pavilion, the other party should at least be a middle-aged man in his 30s or 40s. No one could have imagined that the other party would be a 17-year-old young man. He was too young. It's me. Wang Chong said calmly. Even before the bosses of the weapon trade, he showed no fear. You must be joking. In the end, the owner of that sword is a young man who's still wet behind the ears. Everyone was astonished. Humph, brat, I don't care what your background is. I hope that you can take out 19,200 gold taels later. Amidst the eerie voice, a figure walked out. Head shopkeeper Luo of White Tiger Great Sword Pavilion glared at Wang Chong with hostility. Together with him, the other great sword shops and great sword shops stared at Wang Chong as well. Wang Chong sold his swords at the Blue Bottle Pavilion at a different price every day, and this had a huge impact on the other sword shops in the capital. This was especially so for the great sword shops and great sword shops. They were deeply humiliated. This time, the reason why the great sword shops and great sword shops took out their weapons and participated in this duel gamble was to teach this disruptor, who had broken the rules of the trade, a lesson. Only by killing the chicken to warn the monkey would they be able to intimidate the others and protect the authority and standing of the great sword shops and great sword shops in the capital. Don't worry, I'm here. Before so many people, how can I possibly escape? On the other hand, have you prepared the 1,200 gold taels? Wang Chong said calmly. Bullshit. The shopkeepers of the great sword shops and great sword shops flew into a rage, and even their beards curled up. It was one thing if the one who said those words was the capital's swordsmithing clans. However, Wang Chong, an unfamiliar young man, was a huge humiliation to them. It's just 1,200 gold taels. We don't think much of it. As long as you have the capability, you can take it any time. The few of them blushed and turned their heads away in anger. They didn't want to say anything else. Wang Gongzi. Making use of the moment when everyone's attention shifted away from Wang Chong, Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian hurriedly pulled Wang Chong to the side and whispered, "It's still not too late if you want to back out. Our Zhang clan has a few swords, and we can help you secretly swap them out." The Zhang clan was also participating in this duel gamble. It wasn't that they wanted to kick Wang Chong when he was down, but since it involved the number one sword in the world, it was impossible for the Zhang clan to not participate in it. However, this matter was secondary. Right now, the two of them were worried about Wang Chong. You might not know how big of an impact this matter will have. Look outside. Almost all of the sword merchants in the capital have been attracted here. If this matter fails, it will be no small matter. The duel gamble hasn't officially started yet. This is our last chance. The two of them sighed deeply, worried for the Wang clan. They had already visited the Wang clan twice, and they could sense that the entire Wang clan, including Madame Wang, probably didn't know about this matter. The entire matter seemed to have been orchestrated by Wang Chong behind the Wang clan's back. Regardless of what his initial motive was, if the matter were to be exposed, the entire Wang clan would be held responsible for it. By then, who knew how big of a wave it would cause? Even though the two of them wanted the contract for the Hyderabad ores, they weren't willing to implicate the Wang clan. Wang Chong stared deeply at the two of them, and an indescribable feeling welled up in his heart. If the situation was different, he might have already given them the contract for the Hyderabad ores. However, Wang Chong knew that it was useless even if he gave them the contract. That was because it was impossible for the two Sindhi Buddhist monks to sell it. It was impossible for them to reach an agreement on the price. Furthermore, Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian didn't know that from the start. Wang Chong didn't think that he would lose. Thank you, both of you. I've said it before, if there's a need, I'll look for you. Wang Chong rejected them tactfully. Sigh. The two of them sighed deeply. They knew that it would be difficult to convince Wang Chong. Since that's the case, I hope that Gongzi will be able to fulfill his wish. Turning around, the disappointment in their eyes couldn't be concealed. Wang Chong stared at the back of the two of them silently. The truth was always grasped in the hands of the few. The two of them still felt that he had brought a huge disaster to the clan, but when they witnessed the true might of the Wuzi steel, they would change their minds. Wang Chong lifted his head. The sun was slowly rising, and it wasn't far from the peak. It's about time, Wang Chong thought. With a flick of his robe, he walked toward the railing. Boom! Chapter 58. Look, look! It's starting. Ha, the person who provoked the 4 swordsmithing clans is actually a youngster in his teens. After waiting for so many days, the black cloth is finally going to be unveiled. I wonder what sword is worth 10,000 gold taels. It's not 10,000 gold taels, it's 19,200 gold taels. If he were to lose, he would have to compensate that much each of them. Heavens! Wouldn't he be making a huge loss then? Of course. Do you think that the 4 great swordsmithing clans of the capital are that easy to provoke? What a pity for that fellow. Outside the railing, a huge crowd could be seen, and a huge commotion could be heard. After 7 days of marketing, everyone's curiosity toward the sword hanging at the entrance of the Blue Bottle Pavilion had reached its peak. What kind of treasured sword was it that no one was allowed to look at or even touch? What kind of treasured sword was it for it to have the guts to set an unprecedented price tag of 10,000 gold taels? And now, it was finally time for the answer to be revealed. Everyone, are you all ready? As Wang Chong listened to the rumbling of mountains and seas, he turned around and looked at the people in the building. If anyone wishes to buy it, 19,200 gold taels, this is your last chance. Boom! The only response to Wang Chong's words was a burst of laughter. Even the elder of the Chen clan, Qing Yuqing, couldn't help but laugh. At the start, no one was willing to buy a sword with a starting price of 600 gold taels. Now that the price had doubled to 19,200 gold taels, there was even less reason for anyone to buy it. Otherwise, wouldn't they look foolish? Young man, you do have a sense of humor. However, you should take off your sword and remove the black cloth on it. That's right, let everyone see your sword which is worth 19,200 gold taels. Someone chimed in, and the people in the building burst into laughter again. Don't spout nonsense, what 19,200 gold taels? It's doubled today. Right. 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 It's 38,400 gold taels now. Whoever dares to spout nonsense, I'll teach him a lesson. Lad, there are so many people here, you can't be thinking of escaping, right? Hee, do you think that he can escape? The Blue Bottle Pavilion was filled with ridicule, and laughter. The gazes from all directions did not conceal the contempt and disdain in their hearts. Only Mozaid and Zhao Fengchen remained silent. The two of them looked at Wang Chong thoughtfully. Wang Chong, is there really no problem with this? Wei Hao's face turned pale again as he listened to the ridicule in his ears. Don't worry. Wang Chong patted Wei Hao's shoulders heavily as he spoke without hesitation. For some reason, Wei Hao suddenly felt a lot better when he heard the determination in Wang Chong's voice. Very good. Since no one wants to buy it, let's start the sword duel gamble now. Wang Chong raised his head and said. Wait. All of a sudden, a voice sounded. Wang Chong raised his head and saw a familiar figure walk through the crowd. Yellow Dragon. Wang Chong and Wei Hao's eyelids twitched as they recognized the other party. This person was none other than Huang Jiao of the Huang clan, the one who caused trouble the other day, saying that Wang Chong was playing to the crowd and chasing the crowd away. Hee, lad, it's true that you're the one who proposed the sword duel gamble. However, there should be a set of rules for sword and saber duel gambling. Huang Jiao sneered coldly. He didn't have a good impression of Wang Chong, so he didn't bother speaking politely. What are you trying to say? Wang Chong asked calmly. With so many sword duels, are we going to just slash randomly? Everyone has taken out the famous swords and sabers from their clans, and weapons of this level are extremely sharp. Even if one were to win in a duel, it would leave behind some scratches and dents. If that's the case, there wouldn't be any meaning in winning. Thus, I have an idea. Why don't everyone report the sharpness of their weapons and see how much they can cut into the metal? This way, those who aren't sharp enough can back down. Not only will they be able to protect their own weapons, but they will also be able to avoid damaging the weapons of others. What do you think? Huang Jiao said gleefully. Good idea. Good idea. Many people responded to Huang Jiao's suggestion. Why don't we report it first? The weapons of our Li clan are forged using well-tempered steel. Not only are they tough, they are sharp as well. They are able to cut 4.5 centimeters into pig metal. A man in his 40s with the words Li clan of Qingtang embroidered on his chest stood out. He pointed to the sword of his clan hanging above the pavilion with a gleeful expression on his face. Humph, you dare to take out such a weapon. Our Lantianjin clan has been researching the art of swordsmithing for generations, and the swords we forge are able to cut 5.5 centimeters into pig metal. The moment those words were spoken, the other swordsmithing clans also stood out with a proud look on their faces. There's no need to argue. Our Gengjin Great Sword Pavilion sword is forged using deep-sea black metal. The swords of your two clans are able to cut into scrap metal. The Great Sword Pavilion of the capital also stood out. Soon, an intense debate broke out in the Blue Bottle Pavilion. Even some merchants from the western regions who weren't very familiar with the Chinese language joined in. Some of them even argued till their faces turned red. Wang Chong could hear clearly that even though these people were arguing intensely, the sharpness of their swords wouldn't exceed 5 inches. That was to say, their swords could only cut 5 inches into pig metal. Even so, these people were gleeful and their noses were about to reach the heavens. After coming to this conclusion, Wang Chong sneered in disdain. These prestigious clans had been living in peace for too long. When they see their own swords, they would know what a true treasure sword is. There's no need to argue, there's no need to go through so much trouble. Wang Chong's voice suddenly sounded in everyone's ears. Before he finished his words, he immediately patted Wei Hao's shoulders. The latter understood Zhang Xian's intentions and leaped forward. As though a cannonball, he leaped over the railing of the 3rd floor of the Blue Bottle Pavilion and grabbed the wood steel sword wrapped in black cloth. Clang! The crisp cry of a sword reverberated in the air, and a cold gleam flashed in midair. Before anyone could react, Wei Hao had already become one with his sword, and as though a meteor, he plummeted from the sky, smashing into the metal mountain in front of the Blue Bottle Pavilion. Hong long long, the earth trembled and dust billowed. This action was so sudden that the bustling crowd outside the Blue Bottle Pavilion was the first to notice this sudden change, and it immediately quietened down. Clang clang clang. Amidst the billowing smoke and dust, a series of metal clanging sounds came from behind Wei Hao. More than 20 treasured swords and sabers that had been hung on the gatehouse to participate in the sword and saber gamble were all cut in half. The tips of the swords and sabers all fell from the sky and stabbed into the ground. Then, with a loud boom, amidst the billowing dust, the heavy, metal mountain, which was at least the height of a human, suddenly split into two and fell to the ground. The cut was as smooth as a mirror. Wang! Outside the Bluebottle Pavilion, upon seeing this sight, the massive crowd was dumbfounded. The crowd was silent, not a single sound could be heard. Following which, the crowd in the Bluebottle Pavilion, who was in the midst of an intense debate, also noticed this sight. All of them stood on the pavilion with their mouths agape, unable to utter a single word. Pada! Mozade had been toying with a green thumb ring with a ruby embedded on it, but at this moment, he didn't even realize that his thumb ring had fallen to the ground. Silence. Deathly silence. In that instant, the entire Bluebottle Pavilion was deathly silent. Everyone's mind was blank and they were shocked speechless. Wang Chong had used the most unexpected method to give everyone an earth-shattering shock. Boom! After a brief moment of silence, the crowd finally reacted. Suddenly, a burst of earth-shattering cries of surprise broke out. Heavens! What did that fellow do? He actually split apart a metal mountain. How many CUN is that? 50 CUN? 100 CUN? How can there be such a formidable sword in the world? It's not just that metal mountain. Look at the swords and sabers on the Bluebottle Pavilion. They are all famous sabers, and every single one of them is a godly weapon that can slice through a hair. He actually managed to split more than 10 of them in a single breath. How can there be such a fearsome weapon in the world? This sudden sight sent everyone into a frenzy. For the past 7 days, everyone had been looking at Wang Chong as a joke. In fact, there were even some who secretly mocked him for being a fool. No one thought that Wang Chong would win this sword duel gamble. After all, only a handful of swordsmithing clans possessed top-notch smithing skills. However, no one could have imagined that Wang Chong would win this sword duel gamble. Wang! In the Bluebottle Pavilion, the weapon merchants stared at Wang Chong, and they were even more shocked than the crowd outside. The jaws of the elders of the Cheng, Li, Huang, and Lu clan were about to drop to the ground. How is this possible? The hearts of the 4 great swordsmithing clans were in turmoil. Before this duel gamble, the 4 great swordsmithing clans had been mocking Wang Chong for trying to please the crowd. In fact, the 4 great swordsmithing clans even treated this as an opportunity to display their treasured swords. However, no one could have imagined that their swords would be broken by Wang Chong instead. My saber! This is impossible. Suddenly, a scream sounded. In the Bluebottle Pavilion, the shopkeeper of the White Tiger Great Sword Pavilion suddenly leaped down to the ground. Picking up the tip of the saber, he let out a shrill scream. His face was pale, and he looked as though he was about to cry. That was the treasure of the White Tiger Great Sword Pavilion. To think that it would be cut into 2 just like that. This was simply unacceptable. No, impossible. He's just a 15-year-old child, how could he have learned such a formidable swordsmithing technique? Furthermore, it's such a sharp sword. Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian were dumbfounded by the sight before them. Of all of them, they were the only ones who knew Wang Chong's background the best. This was also the reason why the shock that Wang Chong gave them was the greatest. Duke Zhou's lineage didn't have any swordsmithing techniques. Even if one were to beat them to death, they wouldn't be able to imagine where Wang Chong learned such a formidable swordsmithing technique from. In that instant, the duo suddenly realized that they had underestimated Wang Chong, and it was a huge underestimation at that. I'm afraid that the matter regarding the Hyderabad ores will be in trouble. In that instant, the same thought flashed across the duo's mind. Chapter 59. Before today, this storm was nothing more than a farce to them. From the start to the end, they didn't think that Wang Chong would win. In fact, just a moment ago, they were still trying to persuade Wang Chong to give up on the duel gamble. Thus, the Zhang clan was willing to use their own swords in place of Wang Chong's, thus minimizing his losses. The two of them even thought that as long as Wang Chong passed the contract for the Hyderabad ores to the Zhang clan, they could help the Wang clan to minimize their losses. Yet, the only thing that they didn't expect was for Wang Chong to win. In the Bluebottle Pavilion, Huang Jiao was dumbfounded. A moment ago, he was still speaking eloquently, encouraging everyone to conduct the duel gamble as a civil duel. But in the next moment, the fellow whom he said to be trying to impress the crowd on the first day used a clean slash to sever more than a dozen swords, displaying his overwhelming strength. Who in the world is that fellow? In that instant, Huang Jiao felt a chill rising from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. The entire Bluebottle Pavilion was deathly silent. In stark contrast, the area outside the Bluebottle Pavilion was bustling with activity. Amidst the crowd, countless weapon merchants felt as though there was a magnitude 12 earthquake in their hearts when they saw this shocking sight. The sword duel gamble in the Bluebottle Pavilion had attracted almost all of the weapon merchants in the capital. In the past few days, even though the duel hadn't started yet, everything related to the sword duel gamble had been thoroughly investigated by the crowd. The swords and sabers hanging in the Bluebottle Pavilion were arranged according to the standing of the powers behind them. Even though Wei Hao's slash had only severed more than a dozen swords, without exception, they were the sharpest and most illustrious weapons in the Bluebottle Pavilion. Every single one of them came from prestigious clans. But before Wang Chong's Wuzi steel sword, all of them broke. What kind of sword is that? How could it be so formidable? Everyone was astonished. Putting aside the swordsmiths and smiths of various sizes, even the top-notch swords of the Huang, Lu, Cheng, Zhang, and other prestigious swordsmithing clans were destroyed as well. This was something that no one had dared to imagine before. In that instant, time seemed to have stopped. Everyone's gazes were gathered on the Bluebottle Pavilion, on the Wuzi steel in Wei Hao's hands. Under the bright sunlight, everyone saw the world's first real Wuzi steel weapon for the first time. It was a strangely shaped longsword that was about 3 feet long. It had a gorgeous silver appearance, as if it had been plated with mercury. On its surface, there were strange silver patterns that other swords didn't have. They were like flowing water, exceptionally beautiful. The longsword was extremely sharp. After cutting through more than a dozen famous swords, the body of the sword was not damaged at all. There was not even a scratch on it. It was unbelievably hard. Not only so, the black cloth covering the scabbard was also torn apart by Wei Hao, revealing a black scabbard. From the side, one could see that the inner layer of the scabbard was made of precious golden-threaded Jinan wood and the outer layer was made of black whale skin. The two of them were sewn together with gold and silver threads, making it look noble and elegant. Also, different from the other swords sold in the market, the scabbard of this long sword was inlaid with red agate, coral, and green turquoise stones. These gems weren't simply inlaid on the scabbard. Instead, according to a certain aesthetic pattern, an elegant plum blossom was inlaid on the scabbard. In that instant, everyone was stunned by the beautiful scabbard. This was especially so for the swordsmiths in the crowd. Their mouths were agape, unable to say a word. No one had ever spent so much effort on a scabbard before. It was clear that a lot of time had been spent on the inlaying of the gems. To the swordsmiths of the Central Plains, this was something unimaginable. Everyone knew that the crux of a sword was the sword itself, not the scabbard. All those who worked hard in other areas would be considered to be gaudy, flashy, and impractical. Thus, there wasn't a single sword shop or shop in the Central Plains, including the few prestigious swordsmithing clans, that would spend so much effort on a scabbard. Even if those master swordsmiths were willing to put in extra effort on the scabbard, it wouldn't be to such an extent. The precious gems that Wang Chong inlaid on the scabbard probably cost more than 600 gold taels. Not only so, Wang Chong had even spent some effort on the hilt of the Wuzi steel sword. The handguard was made of silver and gold, and the handle was made of black rhinoceros horn. Furthermore, just like the scabbard, precious gems were inlaid on the hilt as well. If it was anyone else, they would surely say that it was flashy and impractical. However, after witnessing the prowess of the Wuzi steel sword, no one dared to say a single word. Good sword. It is indeed a good sword. To think that there would be such a sharp sword in the Central Plains. In the Bluebottle Pavilion, Mozaid could see everything clearly. Holding onto the sides of the rattan chair, he abruptly stood up. He had always been very relaxed about this wager. But at this instant, Mozaid suddenly realized that he had truly underestimated this sword duel gamble. This trip to the Central Plains wasn't in vain. With such a sword, no matter how high the price is, it will be worth it. No matter what, I must bring a sword back. Mozaid stared at the Wuzi steel sword in Wei Hao's hands, and his eyes lit up. Swords of the same grade would at most leave a few cuts on each other's swords. It was absolutely impossible for one sword to break the other's sword. To achieve such an effect, the quality of the sword had to far surpass the other. The difference between the two was like the difference between a treasured sword and an ordinary metal. There was something that Mozaid didn't tell Wang Chong. Even though his personal sword wasn't the best in Karak Spa Xinu, it was definitely one of the best. It could definitely represent the highest level of swordsmithing in Karak Spa Xinu. To think that Wang Chong's sword was able to break his personal Karak Spa Xinu sword in a single strike. Clearly, Wang Chong's sword wasn't just slightly superior to his, it was completely superior. There was a huge chasm between the two. I've really profited from this trip to Central Plains. Mozaid was incomparably agitated. In Wang Chong's sword, he saw a skill that surpassed that of Karak Spa Xinu. If he could bring such a skill to Karak Spa Xinu and promote it, it would be worth more than 10,000 gold taels. At this moment, Mozaid's heart was filled with a strong desire. He had to buy this unprecedented sword. There was another person who felt the same resonance with Mozaid. However, different from Mozaid, Zhao Fengqian's attention wasn't on the Wuzi steel sword in Wei Hao's hands. From the moment Wei Hao made his move and jumped down from the third floor, Zhao Fengqian's attention had been on the metal mountain that Wei Hao had split apart. It's too sharp. Most famous swords and sabers would only be able to cut 4 to 5 centimeters into raw metal. However, this sword was able to split apart a zhang tall metal mountain. If it was on the battlefield, it would definitely be sliced into two along with its armor. Zhao Fengqian was an imperial army member of the royal palace. The moment Wei Hao made a move, Zhao Fengqian immediately felt the value hidden within it. Wang Chong's sword was too sharp. If such a sword and saber were to form an army on the battlefield, they would be able to slay even gods and Buddhas alike. Not only so, Zhao Fengqian also thought of another matter. Huang Xiaotian has been suppressing me with the famous Sui sword, Snow Drinker. In terms of weapons and equipment, I am no match for him. If I could have such a treasured sword, I would definitely be able to suppress him in the selection of commanders in the palace. Looking at Wang Chong's back, countless thoughts flashed across Zhao Fengqian's eyes. The reason why Zhao Fengqian looked at Wang Chong wasn't just to buy a sword. In the imperial army, Zhao Fengqian had a nemesis, Huang Xiaotian. He was slightly older than Zhao Fengqian, and just like Zhao Fengqian, he was a commander in the imperial army. The factional struggles within the imperial army were extremely intense. Zhao Fengqian and Huang Xiaotian belonged to two different factions, and they had a competitive relationship. Initially, there was no grudge between Zhao Fengqian and Huang Xiaotian. Zhao Fengqian also thought that the conflict between factions shouldn't have much to do with an individual. Furthermore, Huang Xiaotian was older than him, so Zhao Fengqian had always tolerated him in the royal palace. However, for some reason, Huang Xiaotian seemed to hate science like Xiao Fengchen. Not only did Xiao Fengchen's tolerance not end well, Huang Xiaotian even thought of him as cowardice and incompetence. Not only so, Huang Xiaotian's personality was extremely unforgiving. Not only did he speak viciously to Xiao Fengchen when they met in the royal palace, he even made use of the situation to suppress Xiao Fengchen's subordinates and friends. Xiao Fengchen could tolerate the former, but the latter was a huge taboo for him. From then on, the two of them were like fire and water. On top of that, the position of Imperial Army Marshal suddenly became vacant, and the two factions elected Xiao Fengchen and Huang Xiaotian respectively. This made the relationship between the two of them even more tense. In the end, everyone was involved in this matter. Xiao Fengchen and Huang Xiaotian weren't the only ones. Even their subordinates were stifled by the matter, and they fought with one another both in the open and in the shadows. As a result, their relationship became extremely strained. At this point, there was no way out for either of them. Xiao Fengchen thought that he was talented, but Huang Xiaotian had the advantage of being older. Furthermore, he was wielding a sword from the Sui dynasty, causing Xiao Fengchen to be in a disadvantageous position. Not too long ago, in a spar, Xiao Fengchen suffered a great loss, and even his sword was severed. Xiao Fengchen was agitated. For the sake of his clan, subordinates, and his own future, he decided to find a sword that could suppress Huang Xiaotian. However, the grade of Huang Xiaotian's snow drinker was simply too high. The swords from the sword shops and smithing clans in the capital couldn't compare to it at all. Xiao Fengchen went to all sorts of sword shops and smithing shops, but he was left disappointed. Until he met Wang Chong selling swords in the Blue Bottle Pavilion. This is the only hope I have to defeat Huang Xiaotian. No matter what, I must get my hands on that sword. Xiao Fengchen glanced at his sword, which had been severed by Wang Chong, and determination flashed across his eyes. Ah! Just when everyone was focused on the Wuzi steel sword in Wei Hao's hand, a loud shout sounded in the Blue Bottle Pavilion, startling everyone. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.